Good morning. Good evening. Sorry. It's been a long day. I don't know. Please rise for the invocation. I know. O God, we pray to administer that which is just in all educational policies. Being ever mindful of your guidance, stir us to action with love, wisdom, and understanding. Before we move on, I'd like to ask some guests to come up. Tonight we're privileged to have with us Scouts from Troop 769 in Odenton. They're here working on their communication and citizenship in the community merit badges. At this time, I'd like to ask the Scouts from Troop 769 to come forward to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Before we go any further, I just want to mention that Mrs. Nally is out of town this week, so she won't be here, and Ms. Droof is going to be joining us in just a few minutes. She's down the hall at the Meet the Candidate Night for student member on the board. Item 2.03, approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion passes 7-0-0. Next item is establish agenda order. The agenda stands as published. Next, we have recognitions. Are there any recognitions this evening?
Yes, I would like to ask Lois Lanier to announce this evening's recognition, please.
Good evening. I'm Lois Lanier from the Development Office, and I have the pleasure this evening of introducing the recognitions. But before I begin, I'd like to ask members of the board and Mrs. Perkins to come down in front. Members of the board and Mrs. Perkins, I'm pleased to stand before you to recognize the top finishers in the Anne Arundel County Spelling Bee. And you are probably aware that the Spelling Bee is a partnership between Anne Arundel County Public Schools and the 21st Century Education Foundation. Each year we have very generous business partners who support our bee, and I'd like to recognize them. Again, this year the event sponsor was the Josephine B. Scheffenacher Education Trust. The champion sponsors were the Capital Gazette Communications, Educational Systems Federal Credit Union, and SHW Group. Award sponsors were Clear Edge IT and Daily Computers, and the round sponsor was Hair Cuttery. School of the Incarnation 7th grader Isabel Simmons outlasted 30 other champion spellers to win the 26th annual Anne Arundel County Spelling Bee. Isabel correctly spelled the word infinitesimal, I have trouble pronouncing it, in the 12th round to win the title. Campbell Jones of Severna Park Middle School finished second in the bee, and 4 spellers, Alyssa Hall of Annapolis Area Christian Middle, Elaf Zahid of Annapolis Middle School, Becca Hewitt of Arundel Middle School, and Madison Williams of George Fox Middle School tied for third. Now, unfortunately, Isabel, our bee champion, is sick today, and she's not able to join us, but we do congratulate her, and we know that she'll represent us very well at Scripps National Spelling Bee. Actually, when she goes to the Scripps National Spelling Bee, she'll compete against probably 300 spellers from across the world. So it's an exciting event for our students to be able to go to Washington to participate in that. I'd like to ask our other winners to please come forward to be recognized, and please join me in congratulating Isabel Simmons, oh, she's not here, Campbell Jones, Alyssa Hall, Elaf Zahid, Becca Hewitt, and Madison Williams.
I bet you can get congratulations. 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 Put you far away because we're going to take congratulations. 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 All right. Where do you guys want to stand?
Well, we saved this big spot.
Yes, let's move this way. You want kids right in the middle?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And you all move into the right in the middle.
We won't bite, or we won't bite too hard. We just ate that.
We're left heavy today. You're going to want to look at me tomorrow. Good. Take 2 more. 1 more. Perfect. Thank you. Great. The next item on the agenda is school and community highlights. Do any of my fellow board members have anything they'd like to share this evening? Mr. Pruski.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll be real brief. I just want to thank the folks, especially Teresa Tudor and several other people that had the Parent Involvement Conference, and our own board member, Ms. Ritchie, for the 21st Century Foundation. We had a lot of parents and families that benefited from both of those events, and I know several of my colleagues attended that, but I just want to thank the folks that came out to support that event. Thank you, Ms. Birch.
Ms. Korbelak.
I just wanted to congratulate Annapolis High School on their Chasing Ice documentary and art installation that I was able to attend on the 7th of March. And also Arundel High School today, Superintendent Perkins and I were there to watch the Arundel High Travel Abroad reflection presentations from the students who had gone to Kipling Hall. So it was just a really, really nice day.
Ms. Ritchie.
Just real quickly, thank you, Mr. Pruski. We did have a good turnout. Over 200 students came to the Career Expo. More importantly, though, we gave to the school that had the highest percentage of, to the high school that had the highest percentage of students attending, we gave a $500, and that went to Severna Park High School for their SPF program. And the teacher who made the most recommendations also received $500, and that went to a teacher from North County. Yes, North County High School. I was trying to remember exactly which one it was. North County High School, to the avid teacher from North County. So the kids had a great time, and all of our sponsors, and we want to thank our key sponsor, which was Jacobs, for their fine participation.
Ms. Perkins, did you have something that you would like to say?
I would. As many of you know, March is Women's History Month, which affords our schools a great opportunity to highlight the many significant contributions and legacies of amazing women, both past and present. I just wanted to take a minute to recognize 2 of our schools that are using Women's History Month as yet another teachable moment for our students. At Piney Orchard Elementary School, students at various grade levels are celebrating Women's History Month through the theme, Women of Character, Courage, and Commitment. Through their library media classes, students are discussing the meanings of those 3 words and creating and researching women who embody those characteristics. From there, students are using technology to develop an electronic presentation about several of the women they have researched. At our Phoenix Academy, students designed projects honoring famous women in history to be displayed on March 20th at a family showcase event. Additionally, as is common practice at many schools, famous women have been profiled each day on their morning announcements. I'm very proud of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next item is the Krask report.
Good evening, President Burge, Ms. Perkins, and members of the board. My name, as you all know by now, is Cassandra Marino, and I am the second vice president of the Chesapeake Regional Association of Student Councils. Next week, a delegation of over 70 students from 13 secondary schools are attending the Maryland Association of Student Councils convention. Students will attend workshops and speakers in order to develop their leadership capacities. We are also leading several workshop presentations to share our personal experiences with student leaders from other LEAs. The following week, on Tuesday, April 1st, Krask will host the 2014 Student Member on the Board elections at South River High School. We look forward to announcing the new student member on the board at the next meeting on April 2nd, the following day. Immediately after this report, I will be joining the Krask executive staff in the cafeteria for a student member on the board Meet the Candidates Night, where we are learning about our candidates and helping them to prepare for the election. As always, thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the students of Anne Arundel County.
Thank you very much. Next item is the CAC report.
Good evening, President Burge, members of the boards. I'm Karma O'Neill. I'm here to give the CAC report. Sadly, we don't have much to report. As a synopsis, at the beginning of my term in September, the CAC was given several topics for the CAC to focus on in 2013 and 14. Mainly assisting in the search for and hiring of the new superintendent, grading and class ranking, and completing the data CAC collected on school start times, and make comment on the cell tower placement issue. To date, the Board of Education has received the final data from the CAC on school start times and created the requested task force to further research possible options, and we thank you for that. The board has also created a panel to assist in the superintendent search, but overlooked the CAC committee that was formed for that task. We feel we've been told by the executive committee to not worry about the grading and ranking policy, and the cell tower community forums are ongoing around us. The policy is being created as we speak, which is good. As volunteers, we take time away from our businesses, careers, families, hobbies, and some of us other activities that we're also involved in to donate valuable time that we want to commit to the CAC. My committee is feeling irrelevant and is struggling to find purpose. Several members who have stepped up to the plate only to be turned away, or worse, ignored, are ready to quit. I need to know what the board would like the CAC to work on. Is it that our county system is running so smoothly there was nothing for us to deal with? Or do we need to work together to reestablish a purpose and a way forward for the CAC? I ask of you to please come to our next meeting, which is on April the 7th, and discuss with us our purpose and our mission and what it is the board wants us to do, because we are feeling irrelevant. Thank you.
And Ms. O'Neill, I think that the letter that I sent to you yesterday expressed that I do want to work with you to reestablish those lines of communication. So
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Ms. Ritchie?
Just to make sure, unfortunately, the majority of us are going to be out of town at our NSBA conference on the 7th. I just wanted to point that out.
I'm happy to reschedule.
The next item on the agenda is the PTA report.
I'm sorry, no report.
Okay, thank you. I do want to acknowledge that Councilman Dick Ladd is in the audience, and he has signed up to speak on an item later, so I will give him an opportunity to speak when that agenda item comes up. We are now going to move on to public participation. Anyone wishing to speak on an item not on today's agenda may offer testimony during this public participation portion of the meeting. Speakers will be allotted 3 minutes each. Student-specific and personnel matters are confidential and cannot be discussed in this forum. For the record, please give your name before speaking. Handouts should be given to the board assistant. I will call those who have completed cards first, grouped by subject matter. Others who wish to speak may then come forward. You may either stand at the podium or speak from the chairs, whichever you prefer. I'm going to call several at a time. Wanda Stansbury, Rizwana, I can't read the writing, I'm sorry. Maudry? Okay. You may come forward. Mark Pringle and Matt Blazevich.
Are we ready?
Yes?
Okay.
Please
Good
go ahead.
evening, President Burge, Ms. Perkins, and other members of the board. I'm Wanda Stansbury. I live at 2211 Mulberry Hill Road in Annapolis, Maryland. I think I'm going to read my comments, and they may be a little longer than 3 minutes, so I'm going to read fast, okay? I'm a community member of the Office for Civil Rights Advisory Committee to the Office of the Superintendent. I'm also Director of Health and Human Services for the Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis, and a practicing attorney in Washington, D.C. I'm here on behalf of many of our school system's African-American students and their parents and families because of the racially discriminatory treatment occurring in the school system, treatment that has affected the education and thus the lives and livelihood of many African-American families in this community. I was involved early on in the negotiation and drafting of the Office for Civil Rights Memorandum of Agreement back in 2005. The agreement was a response to the documented racial disparities in treatment and educational outcomes. As you should know, this agreement that we call the OCR agreement, overseen by the U.S. Departments of Justice and Education, was designed to change the course of our school system's racially disparate treatment and educational outcomes. I'm here to remind this body that it is a signer on and a party to the OCR agreement, and that it has a distinct role and responsibility to show good faith in carrying out its mission and reaching its goals. In fact, when you read the document, you will see that the board is the first mentioned party and the first signer. We recognize that probably none of you were on the school board at the signing of this document, but that doesn't make you any less responsible, nor does it or should it make the OCR agreement any less effective or important. I refer you to recital number 10 of the agreement, which reads, whereas the parties recognize that the conditions in the AACPS school system leading to the vast educational disparities between students based on race are not a recent or one-time occurrence, but have developed and institutionalized over time, and that any resolution of such disparities will require, 1, a concerted and targeted effort to deinstitutionalize such conditions, 2, a retooling of the school system whereby all students are treated fairly and equally in the delivery of educational opportunities, and 3, a reinstitutionalizing of the redesigned system which the parties recognize must survive the existing board, superintendent, and local political leadership, so that parents can have a reasonable expectation that their children will succeed. With the selection of our next superintendent, you are about to make a decision that will determine whether there will...
Can you please wrap up your remarks? We have...
lots of people, I get
yes.
it. Can I submit my remarks for the record?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
I will do that. My time's up?
Yes. Yes.
Oh,
it is.
wow, okay. Let me just read my last paragraph. We need a superintendent that has a verifiable track record of proven successful experiences and evidence of passion and commitment toward treating and educating all children fairly, no exceptions. We need a superintendent who has the resolve to tackle racially discriminatory practices in our schools, as well as stand up against it outside of our schools. We need a superintendent that will keep the goals of the OCR agreement the highest priority. But moreover, we need this board to exercise wisdom and courage in fulfilling its responsibilities. Thank you very much
Thank
for your
you.
time.
Ms. Rizwan, were you going to speak? Okay, okay, I had a card for you, so, okay. Mr. Pringle?
I'm Matt Blazevich. Is it all right if we sit here?
Yeah, that's
Okay,
fine.
Good. I'm Matt Blazevich. This is my wife, Deanna, and this is Mark Pringle. But we've been here a number of different times, as you probably know. Ms. Perkins and I have corresponded. The recent correspondence that what I've... Now, can you hear me all right? All right. The recent correspondence that I had did not resolve the issues that we had. If you remember, this has to do with boys high school baseball, the recognition top players do not get. The top player, last year's team, the top player, a catcher, was not recognized as a county player when the season ended. So we asked if we could get, and that was what these letters were, just the negatives on this young man about why he was not picked. Now this has to do, we've gone over everything with you. We sent you all the material, all his rankings, all his batting averages. He's the top number 5 player in the county, and yet he never was recognized. So what we want to do tonight, as fast as we can do this, is to talk to you a little bit about achievement and what they go through for achievement and how it's denied. Mark, you want to read the first thing on achievement?
Yeah, I hear the definition of achievement is the act of achieving or performing and obtaining exertion, successful performance, accomplishment as achievement of his or her object.
Now what we'd like to do, this first chart is going to show you, we see these in all houses where there's students. Any student who ever gets on an honor roll, he's going to display it on his refrigerator, he's going to send it to his grandmother, he's going to do everything he can with it because he's really proud of what he achieved here. This has to do with what you've created, this great momentum for them to be achievers. So this is the honor roll. This is only accomplished by them. They achieve this. The second, some of these youngsters that are on that honor roll, they want to do other things. So they're invited to participate in sports in the county. And some of them want to become baseball players. So the baseball players, this is their honor roll. At the end of the season, it's a very short season, maybe 90 days, they appear on this honor roll every week. They look for these numbers of where they rank. This boy is ranked about number 5 in the county, all county, never looked at by anybody. Okay, this third item is the key to it all. You have produced your philosophy statement that says the athletic program in our county is viewed as an extension of the child's total educational experience, period. Interscholastic Athletes is a program for those who would like to pursue the challenges as well as the benefits. We never found out what the benefit is for the boy or the girl who achieves. So this is what we're looking at. We want to see what the negatives were. I can correspond some more, what the negatives are, and why this recognition has never taken place all summer. We understand there is some kind of a side group of what they call Coaches Association.
I think your time is up. Mr. Pringle, did you have anything else that you would like to add?
Yeah, I'm a concerned father. I have kids in the school system here, and it's hard for these kids, when they want to go out and try sports and they become good at sports. Maybe not so great academically. They try to keep their grades up, but they go in sports and they achieve well. And they're hurt by a school system maybe that doesn't have the best sporting record, the best baseball record, or a good team. We've learned that a lot of times certain high schools are eliminated from the all-county teams, those players that play for those baseball teams, because a certain school may not have a good team. You can't pick your school. You have to go to the school in your jurisdiction. So these people who achieve very, very well and have probably the best numbers maybe in the county aren't looked at because the team that they are on is a losing team. And I think that's unfair. I think that as a kid, I would be very disappointed if I went out there and I thought if I had good batting average, good slugging percentages, good statistics, I would do well and get noticed for it. These kids aren't being noticed for it because they're on a losing team. The all-county team is a credential, And it does well for your career if you actually make this list. It looks good for you. And when you try to achieve that and you do everything you can to get the best statistics and don't reach that, you are really upset and disappointed. Something's happened in the school system. Something is broken. And it needs to be fixed. We've been here twice now. We haven't got any results. This has not changed. This is going to happen again and again and again. A child should be able to have the right to be able to make the all-county teams on absolutes. This isn't a beauty pageant. They shouldn't be graded on things that are arbitrary. We need to baseball statistics, and when a player is drafted for a major league, they're looked at on statistics and numbers and how well they do. And that's all we're asking. That's how it's, if it's something different, then the players need to know up front before they try out for the teams and try to achieve those numbers. They should be recognized for what they did. This is very disappointing for players that work out and do their best to make this, and only to realize that other teams or players have worse statistics than they do, make this all-county team, and they're let down. And it's very disappointing to know that this happens, and it's still happening, and it needs to be fixed. We need to see something happen. Okay?
Mrs. Perkins, have we addressed this issue?
Yes, we have.
Okay. Thank you. We're going to move on to some other topics now. We have a large number of people here to speak about telecommunications issues. First, I'm going to call you up about 4 or 5 at a time. Eleanor Melagrana, Leah Mayer, Lori Eberhard, Madeline Rue, and Dean DeCamera.
Good evening, Board. I'm Eleanor Melagrana. I live in Hunt Meadow, neighborhood next to Annapolis Middle School, and I'm here to talk about the proposed cell tower. I was never blessed to have children of my own, but I've done a lot of volunteer work in the community with children. I was a volunteer at a group home for teenage kids. I was a parent surrogate through the Anne Arundel County Schools. I was the president of the Junior League of Annapolis and helped a lot of kids in different programs, especially in partnership with the schools with our Back to School Backpack Project, Kids on the Block, among other things. I was a court-appointed special advocate speaking up for the rights of abused and neglected children. I was a foster mom, and I also started Kids in Caboodle, which is a totally free children's educational and fun fair to bring kids together from all socioeconomic backgrounds and ethnicities to just come together and play and learn without having to worry about money. I've done all of this mostly volunteer because I love kids and I care about kids, and I believe that they all deserve a fair chance in life. Every child deserves to be loved and nurtured, and not just by their parents, but by all of us. And I believe that you all believe that too. That's why you have this job, which I imagine can be very frustrating at times. Every child is our future. And really, if you think about it, they're our only future. They are our future. They're our most precious and vital resource that we have. And we depend on you, the Board of Education, to not only enact policies to help them to excel, but also to protect them and to keep them safe. This requires you to move from your heads to your hearts. We, along with thousands of parents, entrust you when they send their kids off to school every day. And we rely on you, we put our trust in you to make decisions that are good for them on all levels. We don't put that faith and trust in Milestone Communications or in Sprint, because their bottom line is to make money. That's it. I teach yoga, and my teacher, Yogi Bhajan, used to say, don't barter character values for benefits. Honored board members, I ask you, are you bartering character values for benefits? Here's the thing. We've given you so much information. I handed the secretary 4 pages of studies and quotes from doctors. If you proceed and allow this cell tower to get built, guarantee kids, teachers, and residents are going to get sick, and a lot of them will probably get cancer, and you can't claim innocence. You can't claim that you didn't know, Because the fact is, we have given you the evidence. And if that cell tower goes up, it's because you ignored it. And that's going to be your cross to bear. Thank you.
Miss Mayor? Mayor? I know I did this last time.
My name is Laurie Eberhard. I reside on Devon Court. It's the first court in Hunt Meadow. What concerns me is that the electromagnetic field that would emanate from a cell tower is not wise in such close proximity to a home or school. What should concern Annapolis is that the reduced home values would equal reduced tax revenue.
Good evening. My name is Leah Mayer. I'm here representing myself and my husband, Dr. Jeffrey Mayer, primary care sports medicine physician for MedStar. We're residents of Hunt Meadow here in Annapolis, and we strongly oppose the construction of the cell tower at Annapolis Middle School. I read our statements 2 weeks ago, so I won't read them again. I'd just like to reiterate our concerns for health and safety and respectfully ask you to deny the permit for construction. I'd also like to read a statement on behalf of Sarah Hansen. She's a real estate agent for Coldwell Banker and a Hunt Meadow resident herself. Location, location, location is the most well-known tenet in real estate. People look for the best location they can afford, balanced with the size and style of a house. Hunt Meadow has it all, which makes it among the most highly desired family communities in Annapolis. Appreciation is consistent and properties sell quickly. All over the internet is case after case about the negative impact of cell towers to area residential property values. People do not choose to live in close proximity to a cell tower because of the health risk, safety, and because they are an unsightly visual blemish. The unusual feature of a cell tree towering overhead in a neighborhood, or worse, as it is proposed here, at the entrance, and will have immediate negative impact. Property values and marketability will be adversely affected. A buyer will now choose to consider a Hunt Meadow property only if there is a reasonable price difference that helps them to overcome the objection to the cell tower. That will be a drastic and unfair change from the ease we now enjoy promoting and selling this community. And due to the specific location of the cell tower, the effect and impact will be everlasting. Every day, year to year, all will be reminded daily of its presence right next to the entrance coming and going. There will be no missing it. It will not be off in the distance, which in time could be forgotten. As a realtor and Hunt Meadow homeowner, I strongly object to this site selection. Surely a less visible location can be found. Thanks for your attention. Appreciate it.
I'm more comfortable standing. My name is Madeline Rue. I live in Hunt Meadow. I know there's a lot of opposition to the cell tower, and it's a very passionate time. I want to say that I think this could be a very positive move for the community to finally come together and resolve something as a people. We've gotten so dispersed and thinking of not of the community, not in a way that benefits everyone. We own that land. Our tax dollars bought that land where you want to put a cell tower. Our tax dollars paid for the school there. Our tax dollars pay for the maintenance of it. They pay for the salary there. In as much as anyone can own something as ephemeral as airwaves, we own that too, the American people. And the companies that bought a right to use those airwaves with integrity bought only that. We own those airwaves. We send our children to that school, and we live in that community. No one in this world has more of a right to say what should not go there than we do. No one. When I was 13 years old, I thought I would be way cool and very sophisticated if I could smoke. My parents said, no way, as did other adults. You cannot smoke, you cannot drink, you cannot use drugs. The irony of telling children that they cannot do these things, but they have to go to school and play around a cell tower that we know at this moment, as crude as this technology is, because 10 years down the road, this is going to be obsolete. We'll have something else. But 10 years down the road, we're going to know more about the long-term effects of the health hazards. The irony of telling our children that they can't do something that's bad for them, but they have to go to a school where they're going to be exposed to what we know now are health hazards. It's just, that's just not fair to them. I think that we need to have, as Frederick Pohl said, the science fiction writer, we need to have a secretary of consequences. We need to get together and look at the long-term consequences for everyone. We can figure this out. It's not incumbent on us to try to change the technology. I see my time is just about up, so I would say thank you.
Good evening. Members of the Board of Education, my name is Dean DeCamera, and I'm a candidate for Anne Arundel County Council District 6. This evening, I come before you to share several concerns related to the cell tower at Annapolis Middle School. While I applaud the concept of out-of-the-box thinking and the efforts to leverage our assets to generate new revenue streams, I am concerned about the unintended consequences that will likely erode, if not eliminate, those new funds. The Appraisal Institute referenced a study by Dr. Sandy Bond in an article dated August the 2nd, 2012, that stated cell towers will reduce property values by 2% to 20%. This will have a negative impact on many fronts. First, the homeowner, whose largest personal asset is likely to be their primary residence, will see a significant drop in the value of that asset. Property assessed values are tied specifically to the market values. As those rise and fall, so do the assessed values. The county and city generate property tax revenues based on those assessed values. A cell tower's negative impact could have a significant impact on property tax revenues. A typical home in Hunt Meadow pays roughly $5,000 in property tax, according to the Maryland SDAT records. A drop of 2% to 20% in value will have a corresponding $100 to $1,000 drop in those property taxes per home. You can see how quickly the $25,000 in new revenue from the lease can quickly be eroded, if not eliminated. Multiplying the number of towers and potentially the number of homes impacted may be quite significant. Information has been provided. The master agreement between the board and Milestone will generate roughly $5 million in new monies between the inception of the program in 2021. During this same time, your budget for that period will exceed $10 billion. The $5 million is a micro fraction of your budget during that time period. And the county will likely lose all those revenues with a reduction in property taxes. Milestone Communication boasts on their website the communications and transparency in their process. As elected and appointed officials, we have an obligation to our citizens to be transparent in our actions and duties, especially when their health and safety are involved. A process that eliminates or circumvents community involvement should not be permitted. A process that authorizes the superintendent to make decisions and enter into agreements without the prior notification of the community is a slippery slope that smells of sneaky backdoor deals intended to keep it secret until it is too late. You are a respected body appointed to represent the best interests of the students of our county. I encourage you to be open and transparent in your process and include the community. Thank you for your time.
Mark Sermonero, Margot Sermonero, and I have to ask you, are you asking to speak on the Annapolis cell tower or the policy? Okay, so I will hold yours. Okay, Christopher Churigo. Thank you. Marlene, you didn't write your last couple letters very well. Nifel, okay. And Judy Eberhard. Or did I already call you Judy?
Good evening, members of the board. Christopher Chokas from Hunt Meadow. And I just want to make you aware that we have a petition that we started about 6 days ago online to see how much interest there was regarding this cell phone tower. And we thought we'd be pretty impressed with 300 signatures. We just checked as of 6:30 today, we have over 800 people that signed up, which we're pretty excited about. And most of them Pardon me? Pardon me? Most of them are Maryland, but they're not necessarily Annapolis. There's a few that are out of state, but there's a large percentage that are actually Annapolis. But some of those people that are out of state also said that they have relatives and friends and people that live in the community, so that they're concerned about it. But anyway, they echo a lot of the same sentiments we have, our concerns about health and safety. And about 50 or so people left comments on there. So I just wanted to share some of the comments that people left. And these people are actually Hunt Meadow residents. One of them is, I am a homeowner for the past 26 years in Hunt Meadow and do not want my property values affected. Also, there are unknown health concerns due to the cell tower. I do not want to take a chance that mine and others' health will be adversely affected. My wife has already fought cancer from what has been likely caused by carcinogens at a location in her childhood. That was a place where people said, don't worry, there's no known problem. Well, now they're saying that there was. We are not willing to take that chance for ourselves or anyone else in Hunt Meadow or the children at the middle school. The technology is still in its infancy, and already there are documented incidents of health effects on people living near cell towers. Obviously, many people live near them and so far have not been affected, but we really have no idea what the long-term effects might turn out to be. It only makes sense to all involved to take whatever measures we can at the moment to keep children and residents safe. Another one here is a resident of Hunt Meadow and a concerned parent of 3 students who will attend Annapolis Middle School and play after-school sports on Annapolis Middle School fields. I am strongly opposed to this plan. By spending so much time in proximity to this planned tower, my children would have very high levels of exposure to any hazards, including electromagnetic radiation, structural collapse, fires, and communication workers. Please make the safety of our Anne Arundel and Annapolis students your priority. And one more here, we live close to the proposed site. My daughter will be going to Annapolis Middle School next year. Drive by there on any weeknight or weekend day and you'll see hundreds of kids playing lacrosse and soccer. Plus all the parents are watching and there's nearby vehicles. It just does not make sense. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Marlene?
Good evening. My name is Marlene Neifeld, and I have a PhD in Health Services Research from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and I'm also a resident of Hunt Meadow. I would like to object to the cell tower at Annapolis Middle School. You're creating a natural experiment. You've got kids at Hillsmere Elementary who are within a mile of a cell tower on Forest Drive, and they're exposed to those emissions for from kindergarten to 5th grade. Then if they move on to Annapolis Middle School, they will have been exposed for almost 10 years for most of the day, almost all the days of the year. So you could take that group and compare them to a group of kids who was not exposed and see if they had higher incidences of cancer, especially brain cancers, at 10 years after, 20 years after, 30 years after, and then you would have conclusive evidence on the effect of these cell tower emissions. I don't think we want to be the community that provides that conclusive evidence, since we already have a group of kids who are exposed. As a scientist, if I were to perform that experiment, I would be ethically required to get the consent of all the parents in the study. And it's kind of ironic that as a community, we could just do this and not get the consent of the parents of minors or the parents of people in the communities surrounding. So I actually don't think that the school board should be set at a lower standard than if we were to set up this as a scientific experiment. So for those reasons, I would just like to state my objection. Thank you.
Ms. Eberhard?
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to come here today. I first of all want to say that I do not want the cell tower to be installed on Annapolis Middle School property, and for various reasons that I'm following up on. I've been a resident here for about 20 some odd years. Previous to coming here, I was involved with interior design in Chicago, New York, New Jersey, and Maryland. I also became, when I retired from that, I became a volunteer at Christmas in April, rebuilding together for about 8+ years. During those processes, both the former being employed and the second being a volunteer, I got a chance to see a lot of not only community spirit, but also plus and minuses of where people live and how things are operated. There were many times that the debris and the climate produced a lot of poverty and a lot of uncomfortable medical illnesses. Reviewing the plus and minuses of this particular event that may be going on, I would like to say that the cell tower will be about 3 to 3.5 times taller than the building that it will be surrounded by, mainly the middle school. And I think that should be made aware for all of the community. Do we need that a tower that is so large that when you're driving by or when you're playing in the fields there, that we're going to be covered by those cell towers? Do we need, our children need to go there, to go to school there? Do they need to come out and play at before school, at lunchtime, and after school? Do our teachers need to do that? Do the workers who are the staff who are working at the schools, do they need to have that? Some are working full-time, some are part-time. Do those employees need to be inundated by the storm cloud that may be coming to Annapolis Middle School? Does the school office...
If you could wrap up your remarks, please.
Yes, I will. I'd be glad to. Does the school office staff and teachers want or need to have a tower there? I'd like to ask, when was the first cell tower installed in or around Annapolis? I haven't seen any information about that. I think that's a crucial bit of information.
Okay.
Another one is...
I need you to wrap up. Thank you. Thank you
very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mikio Manuel?
President Burge, Superintendent Perkins, members of the board. My name is Mickey Emanuel. I live at 81 Hoyle Lane in Severna Park. I'm here as a parent of students in Anne Arundel County Public Schools. And I want to continue the discussion about the search for the superintendent. With the selection of our next superintendent, you're about to make a decision that will determine whether there will continue to be a concerted and targeted effort to change the racial disparities in our school system. That is, whether African American children will be given a fair chance to succeed. We believe this decision must be a well-informed one and one that takes into account the perspectives of those that are on the front lines working toward a better, fairer school system.
We were first shocked and then disturbed to learn that this board saw no necessity or usefulness of including any persons on the selection panel who can reflect firsthand the current state of affairs of the work that has gone forth, but more importantly, the work that still needs to be done. The OCR Advisory Committee, a group of 6 community members, and the superintendent's executive staff have been meeting once a month for the past 9 years, monitoring progress and making recommendations to further the goals of the OCR agreement. We are troubled that the perspectives of not even one of these individuals currently engaged was considered important enough to weigh in on who our next superintendent should be. The OCR Advisory Committee recently learned that our new Common Core standards are projected to have an exponentially negative effect on African American and Latino students and will not only reverse the gains that have been made toward closing the achievement gap, but will greatly widen it even more. So the OCR community group has not, as mentioned, has met nearly every month for the last 9 years. All we want is what everyone here wants. Every parent and grandparent here wants, and everyone here on behalf of students, is all we want is we want the chance for our children to succeed to the extent possible. As you all know, the U.S. Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Justice ruled on the disparities in education in Anne Arundel County Public Schools. That's a fact. There's no question about that. So what do we do about that? How do we address that? By supporting the OCR agreement, I believe it's a win-win for everyone. We don't want a bigger slice of the pie. We believe that by supporting the OCR agreement, we make the pie bigger. So our proportional share is bigger and everyone wins. And that's how we get the win-win for everyone. So again, as Ms. Stansbury mentioned earlier, we ask the board to have the courage and the wisdom to support the OCR Advisory Committee community group. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I don't have any other cards for anything that's not on the agenda. So I do have some more for things that are on the agenda. So as long as it's not on the agenda. Okay, then please come up. Please come up, state your name, and if you could afterwards fill out a card and give it to our assistant, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Colleen Kraus, and I just want to say that I'm here to oppose the cell phone tower at Cat North. Unfortunately, the type of school that Cat North is, it doesn't have the parent group that elementary and middle school, there's not parents there picking up and dropping off kids. It's a technical school. So that puts us at a little bit of a disadvantage with the opposing, because a lot of the parents are coming from a lot of different areas and they may not even know that this is going on. I really can't say anything better than the very first lady who spoke on the cell phone tower. I mean, what she said was just spot on, and everything that they said for Annapolis Middle really relates to Cat North. Whether it's property values, health issues, safety issues, it applies to every single school in Anne Arundel County. It doesn't matter what school it is. And we shouldn't have to come here, the parents in the community should not have to come here for every single school that the school board is looking into to put these cell phone towers. It applies to all of them. And I had a very interesting conversation today with my Councilman Grasso, I think that's how he pronounces his last name. And he said the bottom line is for the board is that it's money. You guys are doing this for the money. So, and that's the bottom line. It's for our kids, and you're selling our kids for it. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wants to speak during public participation? If not, we'll move on to action items. The first item is 4.01, administrative personnel appointments. This is an action item. Mrs. Perkins, your recommendation?
I recommend that the personnel listed on the attached sheet be promoted.
Second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion passes 8-0. Next item on the agenda is 4.02, policy revision, third reading, magnet programs, policy code IP. This is an action item. Mrs. Perkins, do you have a presentation?
We do, I believe. Or are we answering questions?
It's third reading, so we do not have a
just
presentation.
Answering questions. Sorry.
Mrs. Ritchie, followed by Mr. Jackson.
Just one clerical comment. On the policy, it says magnet programs. On the regulations, it says magnet consortia and signature programs. Is that supposed to just have a line through it? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Just want to clarify, there were no comments. We repost that because we normally put it on the yellow sheet. Just want to make sure.
Right, we normally put it on for a second read. If there were any comments between first reading and second reading during the 30-day public comment period, there were none that were relevant to this particular policy.
Between second and third.
And we haven't received any since then. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, I don't see any other comments. We do have a motion on the floor that's been properly made and seconded. Seeing no further discussion, is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion passes 8-0. Next item on the agenda is item number 4.03, policy adoption, third reading, telecommunication transmission facilities, policy code FB. This is an action item. Mrs. Perkins, your recommendation, please.
I recommend approval of policy FB, subject to final correction for style and format.
Second. Is there a presentation?
There's not. They're answering questions if you have them.
Okay, are there any questions? Mr. Jackson.
Not really a question, just a statement, because we received numerous emails relative to this. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, this telecommunication transmission facility policy is not the approval of any individual school that's out there. This is our policy relative and regulation relative to how we're going to go about those processes. Can you please correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Shaganovich?
No, that is absolutely correct, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, ma'am.
Ms. Ritchie.
And I don't know if this is proper or not, but I'm going to do it anyway. Because people are here, and there's been accusations made that, we're doing it all for money, and money is involved, and that's not going to turn away from that. But haven't we also been told by government that we have to use public properties? Because there was things about the taxpayer dollars and the taxpayer things, and that this all came about not because we went out seeking to look for revenue or to find cell phone towers to put on property, but because public property is supposed to be used as opposed to trying to go on private property and stuff like that to put cell towers because of. Could you speak to that just a bit?
Yes, ma'am. When the Federal Telecommunication Act was reauthorized by the FCC in 1996, which was the last full rewrite and reauthorization, the federal government essentially identified the ability to have a robust communication system as an item of national concern, principally for three reasons. They identified, one, emergency communications, and today, in excess of 80% of the calls that come into our 911 dispatch center come in through cellular communications. The second item is the ability to conduct business and commerce, to transact business and commerce across the nation, across county, state lines. The third is for routine communications amongst people for casual conversations, et cetera. But the first two are clearly an item of national concern for the federal government. Recognizing that it's an important issue that we need to address and wrestle with at the national level, the federal government sought to limit impediments to the build-out and expansion of the communication system across this country. One of the provisions that they put into the FCC Telecommunication Act rewrite was essentially that the use of publicly owned and occupied lands was to be considered as one of the first areas for the ability to create this telecommunication system, because those lands were already in the public domain, and those lands could be used to address this item of public and national concern. So the federal government encourages the use, again, of publicly owned and occupied lands as essentially one of the first avenues to address the telecommunication deficiencies within an area, and then certainly they're at liberty to look at other options beyond that.
And that's why, when you go, when I look out my front door across where the police department is, I can see cell towers over there, because that's publicly owned land. It's not, it's not owned by one entity, it's owned by the public. And so that was one of the places that they, put them in. All the water towers that you see. You have a lot of those. They're putting them in churches. I know in some of the steeples they're renting them out and so forth like that. So what we had to do was then develop a policy to meet this federally mandate.
Yes, ma'am. We cannot, in either an arbitrary or capricious fashion, run afoul of the federal government's requirements. There is essentially in the U.S. Constitution, there is a hierarchy, a preemption provision that essentially has the federal government structured as the highest and predominant level of government, and then naturally followed by state, counties, and municipalities below that. So a jurisdiction cannot, for arbitrary or a non-defensible position, preclude, for example, the construction of telecommunication facilities, because it would run afoul of that federal preemption provision of the federal government in its entirety.
And so any community, the homeowners association could say they have this piece of property over here that maybe backs to woods or whatever. They could sell that piece of property to a telecommunications person to put up a tower if they wanted to do that. If it was within, because the telecommunications people know where when we see on TV that map of the coverage, so these people all know where they're lacking coverage. So if there was a community someplace where they wanted to do it and maybe there wasn't a school or we didn't want to put it at the school because there's no property, they could go into the community and find a piece of property and negotiate if they wanted to with the community, couldn't they, to do those things?
Yes, ma'am. And then just like with the school system, it would have to follow all of the applicable federal, state, local, and municipal codes, ordinances, standards, et cetera, and they would have to seek licensure, permit approval, inspections. So they would have to follow the exact same process as any public landowner.
Okay. So basically what we're doing is meeting the federal, but we're not giving permission. I mean, we are giving them permission as long as they meet and we've determined what those mandates are in accordance with the law to be able to do that. And then they have to go through all the channels of going to the public hearings. They have to get the regulations. They have to get the permits to do all that kind of stuff. We don't have anything to do with that other than to say, this is the piece of property, you can put it on.
Yes, ma'am. The burden of obtaining the permits and all the regulatory compliance items, the burden of that falls on the applicant, which would be the telecommunication provider, not the school district.
Mr. Sheknovich. Now, this policy and regulation actually call for more public notice than, say, someone putting a tower on a private piece of property would be required to do. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. There's the amount of public notification and the public steps that we take in putting a tower on a school system-owned property is many multiples greater than what a private applicant or any commercial business owner or property owner would anywhere else in the county.
Okay. And my other question is, when you were talking about how we can't be arbitrary or capricious in saying no to a cell tower, have there been cases where health concerns have been allowed as reasons not to put up a cell tower?
Certainly they've been offered by some opponents. However, the federal government essentially considers that a settled matter. Not only the federal government, but there's even a state of Maryland Attorney General's Office advisory letter that essentially says that that environmental or health-based rationales cannot be the sole determinant for not allowing the installation of a telephone communication facility, because the FCC is the governing authority and essentially limits both the emissions and everything else associated with cell phone towers, and the federal government has taken on that body of work and published that as national guidelines. And again, so in the parlance of my business, it's essentially considered a settled matter, and unless somebody was to challenge the federal government and have them alter those limits, those are the limits that anyone, be it in Maryland or be it in Oregon, would have to comply with.
So it's really a federal issue, not our issue.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Okay. Mr. Webb?
Thank you, Ms. Burge. I'll ask a question that Mr. Pruski has asked before. Is there anyone from Milestone here? And the reason why I asked that, one of the questions I've asked on numerous occasions is why is the school system in the middle of this fight? Because it looks like it should be Milestone and the community and the government. I mean, we pretty much, as you've outlined, we go by federal statutes, federal laws, so we do what we're told pretty much. And I just don't understand why we're in the middle of this, quite frankly. The other thing is, I'm looking at a map right now on antennasearch.com. It looks like we've got 37 towers in zip code 21401. Based on this map, we've got 6 on Forest Drive. There's 0.21 miles away from Annapolis Middle. I think that's the one on Spa, probably. So we're surrounded already by cell towers. Thank you.
Ms. Brandenburg.
I just wanted to maybe answer your question. Right now, we're just looking at policy, which doesn't suggest that we, enter an agreement with Milestone. It just suggests that we have the ability to do such thing. And I would not expect them to be here to sort of defend our position to develop policy. They are one of many providers, and it would be, perhaps when we were actually looking at different sites, but today it's just policy.
I don't believe they've ever been here.
But you had asked just now, hey, is Milestone here? And the answer is no, but there would be no reason for them to be here tonight.
Well, it would be, the reason is you've got a lot of community here and they could explain themselves. And they could take their 3 minutes just like the community has.
But we're chatting about policy.
And actually, the specific cell tower sites were not on the agenda tonight. Folks have just chosen to come and speak their mind, which is perfectly within.
Well, like I said before, I'm making a point. I have not seen Milestone here. And I know we're talking about policy, but quite frankly, our policy focus should be on things that involve the children and not on cell phone towers and where they should be.
Mr. Sheknovich, did Milestone come to the presentations on the specific cell towers?
Yes, ma'am, they were.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay. I do have 2 public comments on this policy, Margot Simonero and Eleanor Melagrana.
That lady already spoke. Didn't she? The one in the red?
Hi, my name is Margot Sermonero. And speaking of policies, I'd actually like to speak on the policies of the Board of Education, in particular policy number 100, 104, and 507, which set forth the purpose and mission of the school district.
Ma'am?
No, trust me, it goes into this policy with the superintendent.
Just make sure you are testifying on this policy,
yeah, it all
please,
comes together.
Okay, thank you.
Under the Board of Ed of Anne Arundel County, policy number 100, section C5A, the purpose and mission is to provide students with a safe and supportive learning environment. Under policy number 104, section A, the purpose of the school district is to ensure that the district maintains a healthy school environment and promotes family involvement in maintaining such healthy environment for the students. And under policy 507, the purpose of the policy is to ensure a strong home-school community partnership within which parents and families are full partners in the decisions that affect children and families. It is the obligation of the board not merely to ensure you maintain a safe environment for the children, but also to make sure that parents and families play an active role in making the decisions which might affect their safety. So in the new policy that we're talking about tonight, we're wondering, the lawyer that we have retained is wondering, are you authorizing the superintendent to enter into leases when he or she may know nothing about radiation limits and the amount of radiation to which our children will be exposed to for up to 7 hours a day, 5 days a week for the entire school year? Since one or more school districts in New York place radio frequency limits in their leases, if and when you agree to lease space for cell towers on school grounds, What would you be able to protect our children and entitle them to the same protection that the children of New York had? To protect our children, we need to do this. The school district in New York set the radiation limits, which limited the amount of radio frequency radiation to which cell towers could expose their children. The radiation limits set by the school district were more protective than those set by the FCC because the school wanted to afford students greater protection for their safety. The New York case is Sprint Spectrum versus Mills 283 in the Second Circuit of 2002. And it says that in the United States, the FCC permits cell towers to emit levels of radiation which are 5,000 times higher than the maximum radiation levels permitted in other countries. Moreover, many countries have already banned cell towers from within roughly 400 meters from schools. Against this backdrop, Sprint wanted to lease space to install a cell tower on the roof in New York. The school district agreed to lease the space.
Can you please conclude your comments?
Can I use my husband's 3 minutes?
No, you can't.
Okay. I was just curious. Why not ask?
No. So please conclude.
Basically, what happened was Sprint tried to sue the school district, and it was found that the United States Court of Appeal for the Second Circuit ruled in favor of the school district, saying that school districts can impose whatever limits they see fit. So, in closing, I just hope that if we do adopt this policy, that the superintendent is making these decisions and it's not the board. We hope that transparency is there. We worry that it's going to all be done behind closed doors. Thank you.
Hi, Eleanor Melagrana with Hunt Meadow here again. This policy, guys, you all are just like handing over, oh, I don't want to have to do this, let somebody else do it and take the blame. We depend on you. Our children depend on you to take care of our children. You know what's right. You know what you need to do. We don't need to be sitting here telling you this. Don't be trading them for $25,000. Bottom line. And this policy, the way that it's written, it talks about coverage gaps in the area, that we need this for appropriate coverage for safety and security. Well, we went to the Sprint kiosk in the mall, and guess what? There's no coverage maps in that area, not for data, not for cellular. We went there twice. Same thing, you can go online and find it yourself. Annapolis area schools already have 9 cell towers within a quarter mile, 38 cell towers within 0.6 of a mile. There's already 2 cell towers within less than a half a mile of the school property. We do not need these kids exposed to all this radiation. There's something crazy here that you want to give this off.
Can you speak to the policy, please?
I am speaking to the policy because the policy says appropriate coverage for safety and security. And we have plenty of coverage for safety and security. The policy also says to advance instructional technology. Tell me how having a cell tower at Annapolis Middle School is going to advance instructional technology. Cell towers don't do that, teachers do. But if the teachers and the kids' brains are fried, how is technology going to be advanced? How is instruction going to be advanced? Seems like things are getting less and less transparent with this board.
Okay, is there anyone else who wishes to speak on this policy? Seeing none, is there any more board discussion? Mr. Jackson? You done? Okay. All right. Well, we have a motion on the floor that's been properly moved and seconded. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. Oh, wait. 6-1-1. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is 4.04 course approvals. This is an information to action item. Do I have a motion to move this item from information to action?
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion passes 8-0. Madam Superintendent, your recommendation, please.
I recommend approval of the courses listed beginning with the 2014-15 school year.
Is there a second? Second. Is there a presentation?
No, just
Now,
here
if
to
there are
answer any questions.
Okay. Does the board have any questions on any of these course approvals? Mr. Jackson?
I do. Two questions, actually. When will the numbers be available referencing the dollar amount? We kind of go through this every time courses, and we always see not available at this time. When is it going to be available, and can you please ensure that the board is made aware of the costs associated with all three of these?
Absolutely, no problem. The writing of 2 of these courses is almost complete at present, and the other one will be done very shortly with respect to the IB courses, and so we can follow up with the exact cost within the next 2 months.
That's perfect. And then we'll roll those out next year, we're talking about?
Yes.
I believe. Okay, who is on this committee, the Grading and Transcript Committee, and is it a standing committee? Meaning the same members are on it all the time, or
Yes,
is
it is a standing committee, and it's a cross-functional team of members of the CNI division and the Office of Advanced Studies.
So individuals from both of those offices?
Yes, there's student services, there's counselors on that committee. It's about 10 of us, and we meet monthly.
And, okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Would you each introduce yourselves?
Sure.
Thank you.
My name is Ava Tasker Mitchell. I'm the Executive Director for Teaching and Learning Initiatives.
Thank
I'm Maureen McMahon, Assistant Superintendent for Advanced Studies and Programs.
Carol Ann McCurdy, Senior Manager, Advanced Studies and Programs.
Cheryl Metzger, Family and Consumer Sciences Teacher Specialist.
Jack Hines, Teacher Specialist for Technology Education.
Thank you.
And I would say thank you all for putting this together. This is the cutting edge relative to Italian and Arabic, and we appreciate you all bringing this to the IB program. It's something that I'm excited about.
Until you see how much it costs.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any other comments or questions from the board? Mr. Roof?
Could you just briefly describe what the Pathway Design class is? I was reading, obviously, the report, but I didn't understand what it was about.
Well, sure, and I would love to include our specialists from Tech Ed and from FACS, because they're 2 folks that worked on it with our IB coordinators.
Well, the course has a very unique design process. It's not like any other design process. Students they're researching a real-world problem, and they are following the process to solve that problem. And these foundation courses will build their knowledge, their ability to, in 9th grade, finish a personal project. It's a very large outside of class project.
So the 2 courses are the process. So if a student chooses to take the Family and Consumer Science Design process, they'll be doing that through nutrition. And so in the technology, is it engineering? Is that the?
Yes.
So it's the vehicle. So it would be the same information they're getting in the process part, but they're doing it two different strands.
So they're learning the process, so later on when they're doing the project, they can use that process?
They apply it.
Okay.
Yes.
And Ms. Struve, if I could elaborate or summarize from the IB perspective and the MYP perspective. MYP got direction from International Baccalaureate that the design cycle would be taught every year of the middle school years. And with the collaboration between our IB office and CNI, we thought it fit most perfectly with the tech ed and with the family and consumer science classes. And it's really all about problem and analysis, or problem-based learning and using analysis to solve those problems. So what they're learning in their FACS class and in their tech ed class through this design cycle class are things that they can be using year after year after year throughout their education.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Jackson.
I have a follow-up that's kind of somewhat associated with that in the thought as the question was being asked. When I asked you who was kind of on those committees, and whatever the committee was called, I'm sorry, I don't have it out, grading and transcript. In the future, might you also consider a a principal, someone in the school, or a school-based type individual, and ultimately a student relative to the build of it. You know, we pride ourselves here in Anne Arundel County as having the only student member of the board that has full voting rights. At the end of the day, Arabic and some of the other courses that you're offering here, really bringing the student into the creation of it may give you ideas that may make the course that you're already writing that much better. So I would just offer that. And maybe you have someone. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about.
Mr. Jackson, one of the things that we really are very proud about with a lot of these courses is that they come from our community stakeholders and from our teams at the school. So while at grading and transcript level we may not have a school-based person, which we may want to consider, these courses are coming from the schools.
Grassroots
and they're, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's wonderful. I just think on the outgoing piece of it, if you check in with the student and check in with the principal as you're writing that curriculum, you may find that you may be able to enrich that curriculum that's already enriched. Enrich it more. Thank you.
Seeing no other questions or comments, did I already ask if there was any public comment? Is there any public comment on this item? If not, then seeing as we have a motion on the floor that's been properly made and seconded, all those in favor of approving these courses, please raise your hand. Opposed? Motion passes 8-0-0. And speaking of involved students, besides our own student on the board, we do have another student on the board who just walked in the room. Christian Hodges is here. He's our state student on the board. Welcome, Christian. It's good to see you. Yes, from Arundel. I just can't hide that Wildcat pride. Go ahead.
And he just came from our SMOB Meet the Candidates night that we just had, and that's why I was late coming to this meeting, because I was listening to all of our SMOB finalists give their answers to some of the questions that our CRAS students were questioning them with.
Thank you, Ms. Drew. The next item on the agenda is 4.05, George Cromwell Elementary School Feasibility Study. This is an information to action item. All those in favor of moving this item from information to action, please raise your hand. Opposed? Motion passes 8-0-0. We now have an action item. Mrs. Perkins, your recommendation.
I recommend approval of option C, revitalization.
Is there a second? Is there a presentation?
Yes.
So, thank you very much. My name is Alex Shaknovich. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here for Anne Arundel County Public Schools, and please allow the other members of my team to introduce themselves for the record as well.
Lisa Seaman Crawford, Director of Facilities.
Ron Ilkovich, Small and Emmer Ilkovich Architects.
Larry Albert, Supervisor of Planning, Design, and Construction.
We're here to present item 4.05. It's an information action item regarding the feasibility study for George Cromwell Elementary School. As the board recalls, we have a fairly robust and structured capital improvement program here in Anne Arundel County. And the very first stage of that process, once you've identified the project, the need for the project essentially is to go through the feasibility study. And the feasibility study essentially takes a look at whether the project is viable and analyzes a menu of options by which one can go about discharging that project. Here in Anne Arundel County, for each and every school, we study five different opportunities or options for you to consider, and we'll go into those in more depth. But we begin with the do-nothing approach, which essentially is exactly that, leaving the building static in its current condition. We do a patch and paint review of the project, of the building, and the pros and cons and cost and time ramifications associated with that. We have a revitalization option, which is a renovation option with addition. We have a modernization option, which is, again, a renovation option with additions. And then we have the replacement option at the other range of extreme. And again, for each and every one of those, we go through the pros, the cons, the cost implications, as well as the time implications for those options. The purpose to conduct a study is critical because not only does it set the course for the project, but it's also a critical element for the funding aspect. Because again, remember, it not only essentially locks in the validity of the project, confirms the need of the project, but sets, again, the price of the object. With that information for that project, we then go to our appropriating authorities, which is the state government and the county government, to ask for the funds. None of our projects can go forward without funding from the state and the county. It's critical that we conduct the feasibility study because when we approach the state of Maryland for funding consideration, the very first step of the state process is essentially applying for what's called local planning, LP we call it for short, but local planning. And we have to demonstrate to the state that that it's a viable project, that it's a needed project, the project meets the merits of the state system, and most importantly, that once a need or concern is identified, is validated, and we've demonstrated that to the satisfaction of the state, that that need is addressed in the proper manner. And the state has a very prescriptive sort of methodology to go through weighing those options that any locality has. And the methodology that the state applies here in Anne Arundel County is no different than the methodology that's applied to any of the other counties here in the state of Maryland. Because capital budgets are line item appropriated, those two funding sources, both the state of Maryland and the county government, have a wide range of options at their disposal. We begin with the planning process, which is where we are here today. We would then go and ask for design monies from the county. The state of Maryland does not participate in the design, planning or design elements of any project. They do, however, participate in the construction portion. So the construction, the hard costs of any project are co-funded by both the state of Maryland and the county, in this case, Anne Arundel County. And then finally, on the back end of the project, when it comes time for us to outfit the project with furnitures, fixtures, equipments, and material of instruction elements, again, that is an expense that the county government has to bear and not have any help from the state to finish up the projects. In that planning phase, the state of Maryland takes a look at the projects, and remember, as of the very first part of their process is at LP, the local planning designation. They will receive the benefit of the written report that we have here tonight. They will certainly get the recommendation of the Board of Education, just as the county government will. But the state of Maryland has a tremendous amount of expertise in the area. Both the Maryland State Department of Education as well as the Maryland State Department of General Services and the Maryland State Department of Planning has subject matter experts that will review the work product that the local board has created in consultation with its consultants and review the recommendations of that board regarding which of those 5 options they want to pursue. The state will send the team, use their team, the resources from MSDE, the team from Department of General Services, and the team from the Maryland Department of Planning to conduct their own assessment. Certainly they'll be taking our feasibility study as input, and that has a tremendous amount of weight, and there's a tremendous amount of technical information here as well. But the 3 parties at the state, they're all members of the Interagency Committee on Public School Construction, or the IEC, will essentially conduct their own assessment and make their own recommendation on whether a project, again, is valid, is meritorious, and is worthy of funding. And if so, funding to what level or degree. The state has a very prescriptive algorithm for calculating their state support, and clearly things like the square footage of a project and the state rated capacity of a project are big drivers in that funding algorithm, the mathematical computation at which the state will participate. But beyond that, the state has different formulas that apply to renovation projects, to new construction projects, and they vary by the age of the structure as well. Because capital projects are line item appropriated in all cases by both the county and the state on a line item basis, just like the county, can fund a project as $0, meaning they're not in agreement, they won't fund it at all. they will fund it at the request of the local jurisdiction. So they agree with the findings of the local jurisdiction. They'll run their mathematical computations. Hopefully they align with what our computations are for a project, and they'll fund it at that level. And again, that's calibrated to the request. But if the state does not agree with the recommendation of the board or the findings of the feasibility study and the final vote of the board, the state has essentially three options. The state can not fund a project at all. The state can essentially put the project on hold and remand it back to the locality for reevaluation. Or the state can fund it at the level that they wish, that they deem appropriate. And so, for example, in some but not all cases, the total replacement of a building in many cases is the most expensive option. If the state were to find, using their own independent analysis, their own subject matter experts, that the building could be successfully renovated at a lower cost, then they could elect to fund that project at that lower level, at that renovation cost level. And the cost difference, then the delta, the gap between the cost to renovate the building or the cost to replace, in my hypothetical example, would get transferred to the local jurisdiction, the local county government, which again is the other funding partner on any public school here in the state of Maryland. The county again makes that very same set of determinants. They take a look at the project, whether it's valid, whether it fits into their capital debt affordability model, where it fits into the county government's overall capital improvement plan, and then at what level are they going to fund it. Again, they can fund it at zero. They can fund it at the exact dollar value that the Board of Education is requesting, or they can fund it at some dollar value that's entirely within their control between zero and the exact dollar value that we ask. We're going to have 3 feasibility studies here tonight, and our intention is to spend more time with the first one, and that's on purpose, with your indulgence, because it's been a while since the board's wade through this. It was 2011 the last time we did a series of feasibility studies, and we believe if we spend a little bit of time on the first one, it certainly will make the next 2 process-wise a little bit easier. So as to the first item, item 4.05 for George Cromwell, the feasibility study for that building, let's take a look at where we are today. The present state-rated capacity of George Cromwell is 322 students. The present enrollment, the certified April 30th enrollment for this year, is 320. We also create 10-year projections that we send to the state of Maryland. They're independently audited, and a finding is made by the local planning and zoning department here in Anne Arundel County and Maryland Department of Planning regarding those 10-year projections. For George Cromwell, I call it the high water mark, but looking out across that 10-year time horizon, the highest projected enrollment for George Cromwell was 319. The proposed state-rated capacity that we are recommending for this school is 365. So there will be capacity within the school for what comes down the road that's beyond our planning horizon. Again, our planning horizon is really that 10-year window that we have data. So not just for George Cromwell, but for the other schools, we'll be building an additional capacity for things like growth and development that may happen through time. Turnover, where you may have 2 people leaving a residence and maybe a family comes in and the family has students of school age, et cetera. So we always want to build in some capacity. We do have to be careful. We have to be able to rationalize and defend and articulate that capacity. Neither the state government nor the county government will pay for excess capacity that they feel is unreasonable. If they feel that we're building in more capacity than we can justify or rationalize to their satisfaction, to both of their satisfactions independently, then certainly they can curtail the funding for a school based on that capacity. That actually has happened here in Anne Arundel County in the past as well. George Cromwell was built in 1964. Last piece of information. To walk the board through the feasibility study that was created by Small and Emmer Ilkovich Architects and their consultants in consultation and work with the school-based, the community-based, and the State of Maryland Committee. Their recommendation, the school-based recommendation for the project is option C, revitalization, and we'll cover that. It's very important that we have community input into this process, obviously inclusive of the school and the community, central office staff, the State of Maryland. On page 2 of your report, you'll see an itemization of the individuals and the entities that they represent that were part of the feasibility study work here at George Cromwell. The executive summary for the feasibility study begins on page 3, and it walks you through 5 options. The first option, as I said, is the do nothing option. No work is performed to the facility at all, and essentially that's our baseline case. That's the status of the current, and it takes a look at what will happen to that building over its next 40 years of life, essentially if we do nothing, if we leave it exactly the way it is. The second option that we look at is called patch and paint. And the patch and paint option is a cosmetic cosmetic only, essentially, improvement to the building. It does not in any way, shape, or form improve the educational environment in terms of its compliance with the educational specifications that the board passes. And you recall that the Board of Education does, for each and every grade level of the school district, have a set of standardized educational specifications that are essentially our benchmark on a room-by-room basis. What size does a room need to be? What configuration should a room have? What supports or accoutrements should that room have? What adjacency meaning that room should be next to or proximal to a different type of room, etc. The patch and paint option does not in any way, shape, or form address the sizing, the adjacencies, etc. Nor are any improvements made to the building's infrastructure, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems. No improvements are made to technology, security, etc. And no attempt is made in the patch and paint option to address any identified code deficiencies. For example, the ADA, the American Disabilities Act codes. Option C, revitalization. Revitalization is a renovation of the building with targeted additions. Under the revitalization option, the building is designed and constructed so that its state-rated capacity rises to that prescribed by the ed specs for the project. So the building, in terms of its ability, its state-rated capacity, ability to support the number of students that the board dictated through the ed spec process, will be fully complied with. So student capacity is fully addressed within the revitalization option. The revitalization option then takes a look programmatically at the ed specs and identifies not just classroom space, but what other program elements within the building are missing. George Cromwell, and I'll give you a very tangible example, George Cromwell has a multi-purpose room. They have a shared space that is used both for the cafeteria, the food and nutrition program, as well as their PE program, their gym program. It also doubles as their public assembly space for any activities that they hold during hours or after hours. It's also the space that they utilize for rec and parks, for example, and for their school-age childcare program. So it's a multi-purpose facility. Our ed specs that we have in Anne Arundel County do not allow for that configuration to remain. We do not believe it's good educational policy to have multi-purpose rooms. So very purposely, we now construct essentially a standalone cafetorium and a standalone gymnasium spaces. So those functions are not on top of each other. Again, remember that I said the ed specs give you guidance regarding the size of each room and how that room is fit out for all the various instructional support systems, technology systems, etc. The revitalization option seeks to maintain, to the extent possible, it's a lighter version of renovation, and it seeks to comply with the educational specifications, but in terms of the square footage of a room, it does make some trade-offs. And the trade-off essentially is that if the size of the room, the configuration of the room, is within 10% of the ed spec, that room size would not be altered. And I'm often asked in public groups to give me a tangible example of what I said. And so I usually use the following very simple example. If a room is 30 feet by 30 feet, it's 900 square feet, right? And if the board's ed specs said that 900 square feet is what that room needs to be, we measure that existing room. If the room wound up being 29 by 30, that room is actually 870 square feet mathematically. It's not 900. The ed spec says that it's 900. In the revitalization option, it's a judgment opinion, but in the revitalization option, we will not tear down that cinder block or masonry wall or drywall wall, move it over 12 inches to take that room from 870 to 900. There are obviously cost and time implications in making that, and one of the compromises with revitalization is that we are not going to tear down and reconstruct that wall 1 foot over to take that 870 square foot room to make it exactly mathematically equal to 900, which is what the ed spec is. Other items like site improvements, vehicular traffic improvements, parking counts, technology, security, etc., are addressed in the revitalization option. All of the required code upgrades, be they fire codes, ADA codes, health safety codes, etc., full code compliance is achieved throughout the revitalization option, so no compromises are made in that regard. In a modernization option, the key differentiator is that very prescriptive, albeit almost robotic, effort to come into total and complete compliance with the ed specs. So unlike my prior example under revitalization, where we did not take down that cinder block wall, move it over 12 inches, and construct it because we were trying to exactly meet 900 square feet, in the modernization option, we will. Under both revitalization and modernization, with respect to all newly constructed spaces, as I said earlier, we'll be constructing a new gymnasium. Any new space, we're starting from scratch. So any newly constructed space is in fact designed and constructed to prescriptively comply with what the ed specs require. So the compromises where they are made in the existing portion of the building where you have existing walls, where that tolerance level is no greater than 10%, and you're making a value and judgment decision that it is not worth or in the best interest to make that adjustment, again, as long as we're out of tolerance by less than 10%. Replacement option is exactly what it is. Replacement option is the construction of a brand new school from the ground up, and then the old school is demolished. Where we have the option to do that, where we have the land to do that, certainly the ideal is to construct the school from scratch, ground up, somewhere else on the property while we allow the children to remain in that school, and then demolish the old school, where the old school is frequently becomes the area for new parking, for new playground in some cases. And where we are not able to do that successfully while allowing the children to remain in their existing building. In some cases, we will relocate them off premises. For example, we've recently used both Chesapeake Bay Middle School and Annapolis Middle School as holding facilities. And there's certainly some trade-offs with having the children and the staff move out to one of our holding facilities. One of the issues, as the board well knows, here in Anne Arundel County, unfortunately, we do not have as robust a system of holding schools as one might like. So that is sort of a limiting factor. On page 7 of the executive summary for George Cromwell, you'll find essentially an overview of 4 out of the 5 options. The option that's not depicted for you is the do-nothing approach, because again, there are no cost implications, at least additional cost implications to that. For each and every one of the examples, we start out with what the existing building is square footage wise, what the cost is to do the option initially, and that's the first cost. That's day one to put the building in place before it's occupied by students. We then model the life cycle cost, which is essentially the total cost of ownership of that project that's inclusive not only of those day one costs, but then all of the costs that that building will entail over a 40-year lifespan. Costs such as utility costs. We know that over that 40-year lifespan, some of the systems won't make 40 years. They'll have to be replaced somewhere midstream. And a very good example of that is roofing systems. The roofing systems on many of our buildings have a design life cycle of 20 to 25 years. So we know somewhere between time 0 and time 40 years, that building is going to have to get re-roofed. So things like that, in addition to, again, normal things like cleaning costs, utility costs, et cetera, are put into that life cycle cost. So we analyze not just the cost of the project day one, but the cost of that project during the life of ownership, a 40-year lifespan of ownership, figuring somewhere around the end of that 40 years, we'll be sitting before this body again, talking about what are we going to do with this project. And the last element, if you remember in my introduction, not only do we look at the cost implications, but we look at the time implications, because different options take different lengths of time to execute. So specifically with respect to George Cromwell, option B, the patch and paint option, you'll see that the building as it sits today is 42,110 square feet. Once completed, the building will remain the exact same size, 42,110 square feet. The cost to undertake those cosmetic improvements that I referenced earlier would be approximately $1.2 million. The total cost over a 40-year lifespan for that building, having done just those cosmetic improvements, will be $6.75 million. And it will take us 3 months to complete. Essentially, it could be completed plus or minus over the course of a summer break. And that's how we would go about discharging a project similar to this. The next level, the next option, option C, is revitalization. You see, we start with the existing building, again, 42,110 square feet. Once completed, the building will be 63,125 feet. And you'll see that there's some selective demolition and there is a lot of addition, because again, the building in its completed state has to meet that new state rated capacity, so there's no compromises at all with respect to student capacity, and programmatically it has to have the right number of all of those different instructional elements. So there will be significant expansions in the building in terms of new square footage to right size the building both instructionally and student rated capacity. So you'll see the finished building and revitalization will be 63,125 square feet. The cost, the initial upfront cost for that will be just in excess of $13.5 million of hard construction costs, and factoring in the total cost of ownership over a 40-year lifespan, inclusive of not just those first costs, but all those other elements I articulated earlier, will be $21 million, slightly in excess of that. Our design professionals working with professionals in the construction community would estimate that the revitalization project at George Cromwell would take 27 months to discharge once construction activity actually commenced. So that doesn't include design, permitting, et cetera. So it's 27 months from the time that the construction trailer and the bulldozers show up to the time that the constructors leave and the building has been outfitted with its furniture, technology, et cetera. The modernization option, option D, you'll see again we start out with that initial 42,110 gross square feet. We do some selective demolition in the building. There is almost the same amount of new square footage that will go into place there. The finished building is 63,260 square feet, just a hair over the revitalization option. So essentially, they're almost the same size building when we're done. The costs, however, are greater, both initially and over the lifespan. The cost is $16.1 million in terms of first costs, and over a 40-year life cycle, it's $23.2 million. And again, our design consultants and construction experts estimate it will take 27 months of time to complete the project, to discharge the project once construction activities commence. And finally, the replacement option. The replacement option, we would again begin with that 42,110 square foot building. That building would be demolished in its entirety, and a new building would be put up in its stead. The new building would have 61,107 square feet in it. Again, it would be right size to meet DS ed spec, prescriptively so. The initial cost would be just under $17.6 million. That's essentially the first day costs, the cost to initially construct it again before we put people into it. And over the course of a 40-year life cycle, the cost of ownership of that building will be approximately $24.6 million. And it will take 24 months to discharge. If you work your way through the balance of the report, we're not going to go through it in its entirety. Certainly the board was provided with a copy in advance, but we do want to highlight some of the features to bring to your attention. I always like to begin with the existing floor plan for the building. You'll find that in your board exhibit on page 18. The existing site plan, and on the reverse, the existing floor plan of the building. And remember that George Cromwell is a 1964 building, so it was built to the educational specifications that that we as a community, we as educators, we as a Board of Education felt were appropriate back then. The way we undertake education now is different. Probably nothing is more symbolic of that difference than technology. When this building was constructed, we were not thinking and barely even dreaming about computers and smart boards and projectors and sound amplification systems, etc. So we know what the existing building is, and I'm not going to spend time on the do-nothing approach, and I'm not going to spend time on the cosmetic improvement patch and paint option, but we will spend some time on the other three, because they are pretty important. So beginning on page 45 of your exhibit, you'll see the site plan for the revitalization. And in the revitalization site plan on page 45, you'll see in a light tan area the existing building footprint. And remember, very little demolition would occur under either revitalization or modernization. So you're not going to see a lot of demolition. But you'll see in the darker tan shaded area where the new square footage for the school would be constructed. Essentially to create a circulation pattern within a building, make sure that we have the right number of instructional spaces, the right student amount of teaching stations to comply with that state rated capacity. And then you'll see a very large addition for the gym. You'll see that the parent and student drop-off is disaggregated from the bus loop. In fact, if you were to recall the existing site conditions, all of the entrance and access to that school currently is off Wellham Avenue. In the revitalization option, the bus loop, the parent drop-off loop would actually get reorientated and come in off of Olin Drive to create some of that separation. As I said, there are pros and cons to the revitalization, in that, again, we're going to be trying to preserve as much of that interior structure as possible, again, as long as it's not beyond that 10% permissibility range. And on page 46, the back of the site plan that's before you there, you'll see that new layout. And the layout does have a lot of those adjacencies. So for example, you'll see the cafeteria in its existing location that today is the multipurpose room, no longer would serve as that. It would become the cafeteria to school, and that large gymnasium that did not only comply with the requirements that we have, but that is suitably sized to become the Rec and Parks gym for that community after hours and on weekends, would be constructed from scratch, and it will be constructed to meet the specifications that are in the ed spec for both, again, our needs and the Rec and Parks needs. If you were to look at the modernization site plan, and the modernization site plan, I guess, begins on page 45. I'm sorry, got that. 54, I'm sorry. You see, the building doesn't drastically change in terms of configuration, but where the new addition is put on does change. Instead of the gymnasium being on the front of the school, it would move to what's presently the back of the school. The administration area from the building really gets reorientated, and the whole focus of the school really shifts to coming off of Olin Drive in that case. If you take a look at the interior floor plan, again, it doesn't look drastically different, although, again, some of those elements move, like the cafeteria moves, the gymnasium moves. But inside, in all those areas where we were not mathematically compliant or prescriptively compliant with the ed specs, we in fact have moved those walls by whatever degree necessary to make sure that we are prescriptively compliant. And we've put in toilet facilities, restroom facilities within each and every one of the instructional spaces. That's another key differentiator in the modernization option. And finally, the replacement. The replacement option you'll see depicted on page 46. And in the replacement option, you'll see in a very faint dashed line under what would someday become their playfield, you'll see where the existing building lies. The site is configured in a manner that we would in fact be able to construct a brand new school on what is today their multi-purpose field. The children would remain in their existing building during the course of that construction. When the construction was completed, they would move into their new building, and then we would demolish the old building, and where the soccer fields and the play areas are depicted on the left side of the drawing before you, that's where the old building would be taken down, and those rec activities would be, and PE activities would be reestablished. The design of the building is on the reverse side of that site plan on page 64, and it would follow what is our prototype design. The board does know and recall that we've essentially created a scalable prototype. That prototype really has been in use since 1998, 1999, and we've replicated it time and time again. Again, it's modular, so we can expand it or contract it to what the needs are, the sizing needs are of a particular building. But we would be using our essentially board-approved prototype. The only thing is over time, prototypes do change, and they really change largely based on code compliance. So for example, the very early incarnations of this building, of our prototype design, were not LEED certified because that environmental certification was not even in existence back then. But it's a requirement nowadays that newly constructed buildings do comply with those environmental regulations in terms of energy conservation and building features. So over time, because it's a code requirement, just like fire codes evolve, accessibility codes evolve, technology evolves, we have migrated that prototype from what it was almost 20 years ago to today. But the prototype still essentially remains, absent those modifications that we've had to make. So taking you back to the executive summary of your report, and again, that executive summary, the page I want to bring your attention back to is page 7, the printed page 7 on your report. I believe the superintendent has a recommendation with respect to which way she believes we should proceed with this project.
Yeah, she already recommended it. We already moved and.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So her recommendation is revitalization. The revitalization option comports with the recommendation of the school-based committee. And with that, we're prepared to address any questions that the board might have.
Mr. Pruski, followed by Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Shacknowich. That was very detailed. I think everybody appreciates the work that you do because there is a lot that goes with this. As you know, and you mentioned, we haven't had a feasibility study at least brought in front of the board since 2011, and you did mention the community process. Could you just quickly, though, because I know this question will come up with some of the other ones, talk about either what public notice or what discussion involving community association, churches, because I notice in particular some have a church representative, somebody have a community association representative. How are those folks chosen? How is it involved? You know, just for the transparency perspective, because as you know, we had the Boy Scouts here tonight. We have many other groups. Churches use our facilities, Boys and Girls Club, Park and Recs. Schools are not just an operation beyond the day. We go in the evening, weekends. They're 24/7 facilities. So my question to you, would you just explain that process for the benefit of the board again and the public on how those folks are chosen and how they reach out to people to involve them in the process? Thank you.
I'll begin the answer, and then I'll turn it over to Ms. Seaman Crawford and her group to talk about the specifics on this project. We essentially go to the school. The schools know their communities. They're the subject matter experts. They know who the key stakeholders, the participants are in their school. Certainly, the principal as the administrative leader of that school is always on any feasibility study group. We also encourage them to have representation from the other elements from within the school, and that would be obviously their teaching faculty. In many cases, they've got folks from the facilities or operations staff represented. Sometimes they've got their business staff, but we allow the principal of that school to work with her staff to determine, his or her staff to determine who the appropriate individuals are. We also have extend invitations to the PTA and to the CAC of the school, because again, those two bodies are sort of representative of the broader group, the broader community, the parents, et cetera. Many times we do have parents that are a member of the design communities, the feasibility study committees as well. And then finally, many schools have, as you mentioned, sort of key stakeholders. They've over time developed very good relationships, and it could be with a civic association, with a church that they've partnered with on many, many endeavors or activities. And certainly we want to make sure that those groups, those external stakeholder groups that are important to that community participate in the process as well. Again, we look to the principal of that school because he or she really is the person that has the best pulse on that school and the community at large. That team is then augmented, obviously, with critical players from our facilities division, our own architects, engineers, and construction managers. We hire an architectural engineering team that bring their experience to bear, not just, again, in the realm of architecture, but the various engineering disciplines, be they mechanical, electrical, plumbing, be they structural, be they site civil, be they fire protection, et cetera. So there's a cadre of design professionals that are helping us navigate the way through the process. And finally, here in the state of Maryland, because the state is a big player and a participant, and actually will be a receiver of this document at some stage down the road, the state of Maryland always is afforded the opportunity to have a representative on the committee. And in fact, in all three cases that we're going to be discussing this evening, the state of Maryland elected to have one of their architects from the Maryland State Department of Education sit on the panel. So that's the general construct of it. But what I'd like to do is have Ms. Crawford and Mr. Elkovich and Mr. Alberts walk you through the specifics of how they went about conducting the feasibility study for George Cromwell. Because again, Mr. Peruski, I think you're going to find that that then will be replicated time and again. So
the only thing I do want to add is that the group that we used for the feasibility study and design team is a similar group that we use for the ed spec. So most of the time that same group moves through, depending upon how the project's funded. And it is a requirement of the state that we have these members, a CAC, a PTA representative on the group. And then we, like Alex has mentioned, we work with the principal to look at the community, to add anyone that we feel would be a benefit to the group.
And Mr. Elkovich from Small Number Elkovich has conducted many of these across the state. We've been fortunate that he's in fact conducted a number of these for us. And from a technical perspective, because we actually look to our AE team to navigate the process, develop the information, inform the community, and put them in a position where they can make an informed decision. So I'd like Mr. Elkovich to take a few minutes, sort of from start to finish, to explain to you how they as design professionals assist us in that endeavor.
Typically, feasibility study process takes 4 standard steps, and they somewhat correspond with the committee meetings, step by step per committee meeting. The initial step we consider information gathering, and this involves everything from evaluation of the existing ed spec that you have provided to us in comparison to the existing facility and how that existing facility stacks up against that ed spec. Evaluation of the existing physical structure. Are there damages, cracks, settlement conditions, anything physically failing on that building? That extends to mechanical, electrical, plumbing, information technology systems, a code evaluation, and those sort of things really go into the existing facilities evaluation. That will then inform our design process. We come back with the committee and share our findings, and those findings also come to instructional on how the building is used. When certain spaces aren't used for their intended purposes, or purposes that exist now that perhaps did not exist when the building was built, now are taking other spaces that should be used as classrooms or the like. Or unsafe conditions on the site, vehicle circulation, pedestrian pathways, and the like. So we bring that all back, share our findings with the committee, and then the committee will typically share what their experiences are in the building with us. And that really sums up the information gathering, that first step of the process. Once information is gathered, we have an opportunity to take that back and start to develop concepts. And we don't necessarily consider these designs, but they're a thesis against which to test each of these options. We bring those concepts back, review them with the committee, and then get feedback. That feedback is then formalized into the next step, in which we've kind of evolve and generate real 3 to 5 options that we then reevaluate with the committee, get feedback again, and develop into what we have here today, which is the 4th step in the preparation of the technical document, the engineering, the environmental impacts of these projects, and all the background that goes into the document you have before you today. So that's really the feasibility study process.
Now, the one critical element that Ms. Seaman Crawford and Mr. Elkovich left out is when we work with the community-based committees, we do not share with them the cost analyses or the time implications per se. Because we want them to make decisions that are instructional, that are programmatic, et cetera. So Those options are developed through the phases, and once the work product is fully developed and evolved, the design team then turns over those options to constructors, professional cost estimators that have been doing this for years and years and are in the business. They create the cost analyses, both that initial cost, they create that life cycle costing model, and using their constructability expertise, because again, they're in the business of constructing schools and have that core competency, how that construction process needs to be phased and what the implications are in terms of time, in terms of us needing to rotate occupants around, create temporary holding facilities, etc. Again, that is not shared with the committee while the committee's doing that body of work, because we want them to focus on the building, on the program, et cetera, not really be focused on the costs. Cost is a real ramification, clearly, as well as time. So the committee makes its recommendation on which of those 5 options they wish to recommend to the superintendent, absent cost and time implications. We then, as staff, meet with the superintendent of schools and we review the entire feasibility study report with the superintendent. We go through the various options, the pros and cons, go through the drawings, the site conditions, et cetera, with the superintendent. But the superintendent is, again, unlike the committee when they were doing their major body of work, the superintendent is presented with the cost implications, both the initial costs, the cost of ownership over that 40-year lifespan, and then what the constructability implications are in terms of the duration of that construction project. What are we going to have to do to either house the students on site, relocate them off premises, et cetera. So the superintendent is afforded all of that information to prepare her to make her recommendation that she will then forward to the board.
Mr. Jackson?
Thank you, ma'am. A couple of things here. The first being in the revitalization, or C, there are some concerns that I would just at least like to bring to the table. One being my goddaughter actually lives up in this area about a quarter of a mile from the school, so I'm up there quite a bit. And as you come over 97 and you head down to where the school is, it's a pretty steep hill there, and it's not a lot of space, turning space and so forth between 97 when you come across that bridge with no exit, and over the sound barriers, and then down onto Wellham, you're on Wellham Avenue actually. Where we're moving all the traffic in this revitalization site plan, it's closer to 97. And so we're moving buses, we're moving cars that have to turn left to go back up and over 97, closer to 97. And so I would just, further west, I would just offer that as something to consider and a concern relative to now all of the traffic is going to be coming off of Olin Drive. And so it's a concern. I'm not for sure a whole lot of what we're going to do about it at this particular point, because we're basically turning the school, the front entrance of the school, from facing north to facing what would be west. So think about that, because as you, with big buses, got to make a left turn, those kinds of things with traffic coming down and up and over that hill across 97, there's potential for increased numbers of accidents relative to traffic being increased on Olin Drive. The second thing is the stormwater management, which is up by kind of the basketball courts. Is that underground stormwater management?
That is an existing facility, above ground facility.
Above ground facility. So is that your concrete and drainage there, or is it actual?
It's kind of a pond with gravel around the perimeter, but that is the existing condition, and the new condition would be compliant with current codes. We would address most of the stormwater management as it sheets across the property and infiltrate into the grassy areas as we do today.
The reason I ask the question is because now we're going to put the hard surface play area with kindergartners, first, second, third graders that are going to be closer to stormwater management. So it's a concern If it's above ground where you've got little kids that, they end up getting off the hard surfaces, if there are ways to mitigate that from a risk standpoint, fence around it, things of that nature to keep kids from going towards the two trees. And I know the two trees are just kind of sort of designed, but there's concern there relative to making sure kids don't just walk off hard play area into stormwater management, break their legs and other things, because typically those stormwater management above ground type facilities lean to where you can just walk in them. So it's the second concern kind of sort of that I have looking over the kind of sort of site design. In my world, I would prefer that stormwater management to be further to the north, maybe 20, 30, 40 feet, going back toward Wellham Avenue. Fair enough? The other thing on page 40, I guess it would be 46, which is on the back side of what we were just looking at, page 45, where we talk about the gym and the cafetorium. Right now, if you look at the whole replacement school, in between the cafetorium and the gym, there's what is very clearly annotated as folding wall petitions. And this particular option C, revitalization, it looks to me like the same type of wall that the kitchen has, which is an actual hard wall. I believe that there should be some ability for the principal and the staff to have a folding access wall, which would be different from a design standpoint, or right up on the design here. So if you all could potentially consider that, I'd greatly appreciate it. And then two more things, and then I'm done. The first one being back on page 65. Under the replacement, just to make sure I understand, under replacement on page 65, area of existing building replacement, it's 42,110 gross square feet. And then the demolition portion is 42,100 square feet. What's the 10 square feet we're not demolishing?
I apologize. That would be a typo.
Okay, fair enough. And then the last item on page 2, under Olin, under the community, Mr. Peruski talked a little bit about Amber and Danielle being the community representatives, but have we taken the time for the couple of houses that are going to be impacted on Olin Drive to have a conversation relative to the increased traffic along Olin Drive? Now we're steering all the bus traffic as well as all the car traffic, and more or less really it's more all of the car traffic that's going to be going down Olin Drive now, because they don't have that level of traffic today. Have we had some of that? I know we've got community members that are listed here, but have we reached out to at least those specific homes that are right in that? And there are not a lot of them. There are only a few, there may be 6 before you turn left to go into the school on Olin Drive. But have we had a conversation about, we've got community members, but have we had that conversation with the community members that live there on that road?
We have not specifically, because as you can tell, there's a lot of variability depending on which options you do. As Mr. Olkovich said to begin with, the feasibility studies are, they're concept drawings. They're very strong concept drawings. There's a lot of things that are, that are taken into concert there. But we're going to go, just like with every project, if and when we're funded for design, and we go to pursue whichever option the board ultimately directs us to and the state concurs with, we're going to go through a very extensive design process that will take us over a year. And so all of the code compliance issues, the traffic engineering studies, the site traffic counts, the angles of which roads, whether we need an XO lane, a DSO lane, all of those things are going to have to be evaluated during that much more detailed design phase, and they'll have to be agreeable to the county's Bureau of Traffic Engineering, the Planning and Zoning Department, et cetera. Just like the stormwater management here in Anne Arundel County, that stormwater management and really environmental controls is one of our, sort of monikers here. We're very proud of the environmental protection measures that we put into place for green space and trees and water quality, water quantity, et cetera, from stormwater. So we'll be working with the county folks in planning and zoning and in the building department to make sure that the design fully complies with the county and state stormwater management requirement, inclusive of, for example, they have very prescriptive requirements about fencing and depth of stormwater management ponds, et cetera. So all of that type of thing will be delved into very heavily. And then finally, if you thought the number of community meetings that we have here, Mr. Peruski asked about that, it's only 4 in this case. There's going to be multiples of that during the design phase, because we will go through a schematic design process. There will essentially be community input opportunities there. We'll go through the design development process, more opportunities for broader community input. We'll finish up with the construction document, the CD phase, and then as part of our permitting activities, again, depending on which department of county government or state government we interact with, we'll have to hold hearings and informative sessions,
I'm with you,
et cetera. So
I'm totally with you. All I'm really, I guess, asking or begging is that by the time when we approve this, the general concept of moving to Olin Drive is for the most part going to be set. It's going to take an act of Congress in order to move it from being on that road. I think the sooner we at least allow the community to know that, the better we'll be able to bring them along in those other meetings that you're talking about having down the road through the permitting process and all the other stuff.
Yes, sir.
That's all I'm just recommending, suggesting, asking. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, we have a motion that's been properly made and seconded. All those in favor of the revitalization option, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes 8-0-0. The next item on the agenda is 4.06, Jessup Elementary School Feasibility Study. This is an information and action item. All those in, is there a motion to move this item from information to action?
Moved.
Second. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion passes 8-0-0. We now have an action item. Mrs. Perkins, your recommendation, please.
I recommend approval of option E, replacement.
So moved.
Second.
Is there a presentation?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. For the record, Alex Shaknovich, Chief Operating Officer for Anne Arundel County Public Schools. And once again, please allow me a brief opportunity to have the other members of the team here introduce themselves for the public record.
Please do.
Lisa Seaman Crawford, Director of Facilities.
Dave Strang with Grimm & Parker Architects.
Larry Alberts, Supervisor of Planning, Design, and Construction.
Daniel Brooks with Grimm & Parker Architects.
Kieran Wilmus with Grimm & Parker Architects.
Welcome.
And again, we're here to present item 4.06, an information action item regarding the feasibility study for Jessup Elementary School. By way of background, the present state rated capacity of Jessup Elementary School was 435 students. The enrollment, however, at Jessup today is 483, so it is over capacity as it sits today. And taking a look out over our 10-year planning horizon, that enrollment stays at about that level, so 481 going out over that 10-year horizon. The proposed school, the ed specs that were approved by the Board of Education, has a state rated capacity of 575. That area, unlike, for example, Cromwell, that's fairly developed and is in fact having turnover, but not a lot of growth and development, while there are not many projects currently approved and on the books for 175 corridor in Jessup, Jessup is in fact, 175 corridor is a growth area. There is land there that can be developed pretty robustly. And we know that over time, we want to make sure that we've got the capacity essentially to absorb that growth. So when we went through the ed spec process, we recommended that 575 be the appropriate state rated capacity. Those ed specs were in fact shared with the state of Maryland as well, which is one of our requirements. And their review of the project at that stage did in fact confirm that 575 was supportable. That will, however, be reanalyzed once again once this feasibility study goes to them and we go through that planning process. Jessup Elementary School was constructed in 1955 and has seen a number of additions occur onto the school over time. As time marched forward, unfortunately, many of those additions were not, really planned out very well or organized very well. So the building that sits there today does have a lot of issues concerning multiple levels. So certainly accessibility is a big issue within the building, ADA compliance specifically. And the way that it was constructed, you've got a lot of disjointed pieces that thematically really don't fit very well with one another. And that's some of the information that we hope to elaborate upon this evening. As we began with the George Cromwell project, if you turn to page 1 of your exhibit, you'll see the team, the feasibility study committee, Mr. Pruski, that you referenced earlier. And you'll see once again that there are representatives from the school, from the community, from central office, the Maryland State Department of Education, and in this case, Grimm and Parker Architects and their supporting engineers. The executive summary for the various options begin on page 3 of the report, and I'll skip the do nothing option because that's always our baseline. But under the patch and paint, once again, we'll patch and repair on page 4. You'll see we'll patch and repair portions that a facility aren't currently in working order. Really, it's going to be a cosmetic improvement of the facility. No attempt is going to be made to address systemic mechanical, electrical, plumbing deficiencies, for example. No efforts will be made to address technology deficiencies, and no efforts would be made to bring the building into compliance with either what the board approved educational specification is or code compliance per se, because the building essentially is grandfathered into certain code provisions. We would not undertake those efforts that would move the building forward from that grandfathered code compliance status to what the status of a newly constructed or renovated building would be. Under the revitalization option, remember this is the option that we do in fact undertake a lot of renovation within a building, and we do a lot of addition onto the building to make sure that both the capacity of the building is right-sized, in this case upsized to that new state rated capacity, as well as by count all those programmatic spaces, the right number of teaching stations, the right number of instructional support spaces, the right number of public assembly spaces, etc., are put into the building. We do, as with Cromwell, though, we do make that judgment on the size and configuration of the spaces, where those spaces can be reused or repurposed and are within that 10% tolerance, 10% or less. We will once again not tear down a masonry wall that's in good order, move it over modestly, and reconstruct it again to make it mathematically align, which is, in fact, what we would do in a modernization. So again, under revitalization, we will not move that wall, that hypothetical 12 inches that I talked about earlier. All of the, I call it the heart and lung of the building, so the major infrastructure elements of the building, the planning, the plumbing, the heating, ventilation, air conditioning, the fire safety features, the technology features, the security features, etc. All of those, again, heart and lung elements of the building, though, would get comprehensively upgraded and or replaced to bring them into the state of current as well. Under revitalization option, again, we would address those site issues, things like parking issues, things like playfield issues, recreational activities, gymnasium space, etc. So you'll see that, for example, the parking count of the building will in fact increase from its current 86 to 101. So more parking would be added in the revitalization option. Moving along at a high level overview to the revitalization, to the modernization option, again, just a narrative overview. We would in fact renovate the building more extensively, in fact, to make sure that the building prescriptively complied to the best of our ability to the exact square foot requirement of what the board approved ed specs were. So, you know, if we're short 3.5% or 1.5%, we'll do what it takes essentially to make it 100% sized correctly. All the other elements that I spoke to under the revitalization option, again, the heart and lungs of the building, the HVAC, the fire safety elements, the technology elements, plumbing, et cetera. All of those elements would be addressed under the modernization option. And we would, wherever practical or feasible as well, we would put in individualized restroom and toileting facilities within the classroom to the maximum extent possible. The site features would be addressed similarly, so deficiencies in site accessibility, in traffic, traffic handling and parking space counts, et cetera, would be similarly reviewed. And you'll see that in the modernization option, actually the number of parking spaces would increase slightly more than the revitalization option. It would increase by 29 spaces up to a total of 115. But the building, once again, would be properly sized for the student body count, for the right number of instructional spaces, et cetera. Option E is the complete the complete replacement of the building. So it would be the construction of a brand new building from scratch, and it would be the removal or the demolition of the existing building. That information is pulled together for you really on page 9, where I would like to spend just a little bit of time, as we did with George Cromwell on page 9, the cost and time implications of your options. You'll see that the patch and paint option, the building doesn't expand square footage wise. The initial cost of construction would be about $2.1 million, and over a 40-year lifetime, the cost of ownership, essentially doing little to nothing, would be about $13.2 million. Under revitalization, the existing building is 83,868 square feet. The building under revitalization option would expand up to 101,000, almost 102,000 square feet in size. The initial construction cost would be about $23.6 million, and the cost of ownership over a 40-year life cycle analysis would be $35.6 million. Under the modernization, and it would take 27 months to discharge. I neglected to say that. Under the modernization option, you'll see we start out with the same exact building, but the finished product, instead of being 101,000 square feet under the revitalization option, under the modernization option, it would be approximately 97,000 square feet. The initial cost of discharging the modernization option would be $29.9 million, and over a 40-year lifespan, it would be $40.8 million, just under that. And finally, replacement. And again, it's 27 months to do that work. Replacement option, option E, would have a 24-month duration. The entire existing building would be demolished and reconstructed anew. The finished product, the finished building, would be 84,372 square feet. The initial cost would be $24.5 million, and the total cost of ownership over time would be $33.4 million. And if we can stay on that page just a little bit longer to take a look at it, in summation, this is one of those rare examples where, in fact, replacing the building not only makes sense programmatically, but if you take a look at the cost implications, replacing the building essentially is in line with what revitalization is. But if you take a look at the cost of the building over time, it's actually the least expensive option in terms of owning it as an owner over a 40-year period of time. To take a look at the building in detail, to refamiliarize the board with the project as it sits there today, on page 27, you'll see the site plan, and on the back of page 27, you'll see the in the pages immediately following the room configuration as it exists. But we essentially know that the building sits very tight up to 175. Really, it's almost right on the road there at 175, which is a very high speed and very heavily trafficked main road that connects BW Parkway, connects I-95, and really is a route that many folks that live up in Baltimore County, Howard County, et cetera, utilize to access Anne Arundel County, and specifically to access a lot of the Fort Meade, the NSA military industrial complex, intelligence complex that's up in that part of the county. So the existing building, in addition to many of those things I said earlier, built over many phases, sort of very disjointed with different pieces sort of glued on, in a little bit of a haphazard fashion, does suffer from being very, very tight up against 175. When you take a look at our opportunities to address some of those things, then revitalization begins on page 67.
Can you just go ahead and skip to the one that's recommended, please?
The recommendation is for replacement, and the replacement option is on page 101. And you'll see that dashed very tight against Route 175. You'll see that in the dashed line, you'll see where the building used to be, there right against 175. We would construct a brand new building on what today is the multi-purpose room, the play field behind the existing school. The children would remain in the Jessup Elementary School facility during the course of that construction. We would construct new play fields and new parking areas surrounding the brand new building, and at the completion of that project, we would then demolish the existing building that directly fronts Route 175, and that essentially would be turned back into green space and serve as a buffer from the traffic and the noise that's along 175. I think with that, we can turn it over to questions safely.
Are there any questions from the board? I don't think so. Is there any public comment? Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, we have a motion on the floor that's been properly made and seconded. All those in favor of the superintendent's recommendation? All those opposed? Motion passes 8-0-0. Next item on the agenda is 4.07, Arnold Elementary School feasibility study. This is an information to action item. All those in favor of moving this item? Oh, is there a motion to move this item from excuse me, could you please, I have to get the business done. Is there a motion to move this item from information to action, please? Second. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion passes 8-0-0. Now we have an action item. Mrs. Perkins, your recommendation.
I recommend approval of option C, revitalization.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? Okay, is there a presentation, Mrs. Perkins?
Yes.
Thank you. For the record, Alex Sheknovich, Chief Operating Officer, and I'm joined by the same team that was here for the previous item regarding Jessup Elementary School, with Grimmon Parker Architects being the principal lead architect on the project, and their design support team with them. The present Arnold Elementary School has a state rated capacity of 456 students is the current SRC of the building. Its enrollment, the September 30th state certified enrollment for the facility was 424. Taking a look out over that planning horizon, the county and state approved demographics between now and 2022-2023 school year. The high water mark for enrollment is 429. We are, however, proposing to build a building that would have a state rate capacity of 565. So the current building has a state rate capacity of 456. The new building would have a state rated capacity of 565 under all of the scenarios. The building was constructed in 1967 by point of reference. The school-based planning advisory committee recommended replacement, option E, replacement, and as you just heard, the superintendent's recommended option C, revitalization. The members of the planning committee for the Arnold Elementary School feasibility study are depicted on page 1 of your report. Again, has school, community, central office, and state of Maryland entities represented on the planning committee, in addition to our architects and our engineering consultants. The executive summary for the project begins on page 3, again with customary do nothing and patch and paint options. Option C, revitalization. Much like the projects that we've addressed before, the revitalization option has renovations to the existing building. It also has a series of targeted additions onto the building to ensure that the building is right-sized both to the state rated capacity, the new state rated capacity of the building, as well as programmatically does have the right number of elements, right number of teaching stations, right number of public assembly spaces, support spaces, et cetera, to comply with that ed spec. Much like with the other two projects in terms of revitalization, each and every room was analyzed for its size and its geometry, its configuration, and for the most part, where that room was within or less than 10% off of what the ed spec was, the prescriptive requirements of the ed spec, the wall that subdivided that room from an adjacent room would not be taken down in a revitalization option and then moved. The critical elements such as, again, mechanical systems, plumbing systems, electrical, fire protection features, security features, technology features, all of those heart and lungs of the building would all be upgraded and or replaced to comply with current building requirements, current mechanical, electrical, plumbing requirements, and a current state of technology and fire code compliance. The building would obviously have the naturally expected cosmetic improvements in addition to those heart and lung elements. So all of the interior finishes of the entire building would be replaced. So all of the ceiling tiles, all of the floor tiles, all of the paint, the wall coverings, the stair coverings, etc. All of those would be replaced under a revitalization option as well. The finished project and revitalization, traffic, parking has been a big issue at Arnold, and that's been long recognized. Under a revitalization option, 52 additional spaces would be added to the parking configuration there, taking the total number of parking spaces from 62 to 114. Increased and improved emergency vehicle access would be provided to the school. The parent drop-off area would be improved from its current configuration. There would be a dedicated lane adjacent to the side of the building to facilitate parent drop-offs and queuing for cars looking to discharge or pick up their youngsters in the morning or in the afternoon. Natural daylighting would be provided, would be introduced into all of the instructional areas within the building, some of which does not currently exist. Again, all the programmatic deficiencies, not just in terms of student body count, but instructionally, the programmatic deficiencies would be accounted for. Toilets would be constructed, not in every room, but some toilets and restrooming capacity would be added to the building. And then finally, again, all of the other code compliant elements would be addressed. Under modernization, really the differentiator is, again, we would in fact be moving all of those interior partitions where necessary, and by all I mean each and every one essentially, where it's feasible, to comply with the prescriptive requirements of the ed spec. All of the other elements that we talked about for revitalization, many of those do stay the same. There are a couple key differentiators. Obviously, in addition to moving those interior walls, there will be some other rearrangement within the space, and we'll go over those in a little bit. Parking would be increased by 77 spaces, so it would go from 62 to 139, which would be a little bit more than under a revitalization option. Things that I mentioned earlier, like the fire lane and emergency vehicle access, would be expanded. A multi-purpose field would be reconfigured and increased in size modestly. The parent drop-off issue gets addressed once again by having a dedicated lane that's adjacent to the side of the building for parental drop-offs for arrivals and dismissal. The administration space for the building would actually get shifted. The building, and we'll see this later if you view the floor plans, will get shifted to be more centrally located. It's actually offset a little bit off-center from the building, so the admin space would get shifted to be centrally located within the building. Once again, program areas will be brought into conformance with ed specs. Natural lighting would be introduced into all of the instructional spaces, and additional bathroom facilities would be added into the building beyond that which would be added in at the revitalization phase. And then finally, the complete replacement option, which would involve constructing a brand new school where today the multipurpose room field, multipurpose fields exist, and then demolishing the existing school and replacing where the existing school is currently would be the multipurpose fields and the parking area, et cetera, for the new school. So it would be the establishment of a brand-new facility on the site. Taking a look at the specifics in terms of the dollar implications and the time elements. The patch and paint option, the building, as I said earlier, was 56,255 gross square feet. It would remain as such. The patch and paint option would cost just under $1.6 million initially, and the cost of ownership over a 40-year life cycle would be just under $9 million in total. The revitalization option would take 27 months to complete. The students would be able to remain there at the site while we're doing the revitalization option, just like we currently are doing in Mills Parole, at Crofton Elementary School, at any number of schools throughout the county. It will take 27 months to do that renovation work there and expansion under revitalization option. The existing 25.2 thousand square foot building would be increased to just over 81,000 square feet. The initial cost of doing the revitalization option will be just under $20.4 million. That's, again, the initial cost of construction. And over a 40-year time period, the cost of ownership would be just under $30 million, so $29.98 million. Modernization would, again, take that same 27-month duration. The students would be allowed to remain there within their building. That 56.2 million square foot building, 1,000 square foot building, would be upsized to 82.9 thousand square feet, so be increased slightly larger than under the revitalization option. It is more expensive. The cost on the the cost on the modernization option would increase over revitalization. The initial cost would be $26.4 million, and over a 40-year time period, it will be $35.7 million. Finally, the replacement option, option E, would take 24 months to discharge. Due to the configuration of the site, further analysis would have to be done to see if, in fact, the students could remain there at the site. The new construction would be taking place on the hill above the school, and whether the constructability of that site would allow for the existing school to remain while the new school is being constructed above is still in question. So some further analysis would have to be done, unlike the other two, that the students would remain throughout the course of the construction project. Under replacement, that is a yet to be resolved issue. There might be a requirement that the students be relocated to either our Chesapeake Bay Middle School holding facility or the Annapolis Middle School holding facility. As I said, it will take 24 months to execute. The existing building would be demolished in its entirety and would be replaced with a new 84.4 thousand square foot facility. The initial cost would be $26.4 million, and the cost of ownership over a 40-year life cycle would be $35.3 million. For those of you that need a refresher for how Arnold Elementary School is currently configured, that existing floor plan is depicted on page 27. Both the site plan on the pages immediately following page 27 is the floor plan for the building. Revitalization, which is the option that is recommended by the superintendent of schools. The site plan that's associated with that begins on page 63 of your packet. And as you see, a large majority of the building is in fact retained. That's the light orange shading. The hatched shaded area shows parts of the existing building that will be demolished. The areas that are in a darker orange color on page 63 will be areas that will be newly constructed, expanded for the school building. Again, you'll see that there is a dedicated drop-off area. The bus loop remains essentially in its existing configuration, and you'll see where the current parking lot that accommodates approximately 52 parked vehicles would be expanded with additional parking to the northwest of that would accommodate another 62 students, or 62 vehicles. Arnold Elementary School is a two-story building, so on page 65 and 67, you'll see the floor plans for both the upper and the lower levels. Noteworthy on page 65, again, much like the discussion we had at Cromwell, where the school at present, again, has that multi-purpose room. So you have that singular public assembly space that functions as both its cafeteria, its gymnasium space, its public assembly space, its music space, and after-hour space. That would get corrected by the construction of a brand-new gymnasium. The gymnasium would be in the same location as the music functions as well. The gymnasium would be constructed on the opposite end of the building, and a new before and after care area, because again, we partner with Rec and Parks in terms of the SAC, the School Age Child Care Program. A new before and after care area would be constructed for the school. The main entrance would remain in its current location, as I previously said. The lower level of the school is depicted on page 67. With that, I believe we turn it back to members of the board for questions.
Mr. Jackson?
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Shagnovich, normally this is one where, or normally I go along with a large portion of the recommendations that come forward. I'm curious as to why the recommendation is different from the Planning Advisory Committee's recommendation. If you could help me kind of sort of, and the team could help me kind of sort of understand the reasons behind the curtain associated with the Planning Advisory Committee's recommendation of E, and what the superintendent's recommending, which is C, the revitalization, that would be really, really helpful.
Well, I can't speak for the advisory committee, but I believe a new school essentially speaks for itself. It's a total replacement of the existing facility with a brand new facility there on the site. So the attributes of a new facility are exactly that. They're a new facility. It's one of our prototype schools and would prescriptively comply with the educational specifications. The revitalization juxtaposed against that, a couple points, I guess, to lead into it. As I said earlier, the state of Maryland does have a very prescriptive methodology in which they undertake and analyze any building endeavor, any capital improvement endeavor. And they would obviously receive the benefit of the report we've created, and then they would send their own experts from Department of General Services and from the Maryland State Department of Education, their team of architects, engineers, and inspectors to take a look at the building as well, to make their own analysis. In the state system, the easiest way I've been able to explain that to most folks is that they encourage you to be able to resolve your issues, your deficiencies, at the lowest common denominator. So that's done for a lot of reasons. One, cost is a consideration. Many times the lowest common denominator in terms of your palette of options sometimes is less costly, although not always, and we have seen options here as well. The state of Maryland has a smart growth policy where they encourage the reuse and readaptation of existing facilities. So the state algorithm, the state decision-making algorithm on the way that they review and analyze projects is very heavily weighted towards reuse and readapt as opposed to replace. In fact, when you take a look at their rank ordering of their analyses, replacement is the last option. So you're going to have to be able to convince them that you've looked at the other 7 alternatives that are ranked higher in the state's judgment as options for you to address an issue before you get to the final option as replacement. And remember that if they don't agree in their estimation, they've got a number of options, including completely not approving or funding the project at all, or penalizing the project in terms of the state's contribution for that. Several other issues, obviously, Arnold Elementary School, in terms of a structural perspective, is a very sound building. And we've got many, many buildings around that have lasted for a lot longer, you know, than Arnold Elementary School, constructed in 1967. So a lot of the issues with Arnold really aren't, you know, the bricks and mortar elements of the building. A lot of the concerns that we've had at Arnold over time, for example, are with things like humidity, climate control, moisture control within the building, et cetera. You know, when this building was constructed back in the 1960s, we really didn't have the same level of understanding or expertise that we do now, for example, in the area of HVAC. So the kind of HVAC systems, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, dehumidification systems that are available to design professionals, you know, such as Grimm & Parker and their consultants, is vastly expanded, and we have a lot better handle on not just the issues, but the palette of options, the different systems and methodologies that we can go about addressing it. Any of us who have been to Florida or the southern parts of the United States, Louisiana, et cetera, you know that their climate is much more humid. They've got much more rain, et cetera, than we do here. And each and every day we successfully construct schools, hospitals, hotels, nursing homes, high-rises, office buildings, you name it, in the southern regions of the states to acceptable, you know, interior climate conditions. You know, the key is assessing the building, assessing the environment, and making the right match based on that assessment between what mechanical systems you select to properly control and condition that environment. Different climatology, obviously, but different building configurations, the way they're configured, the amount of shading, the orientation with respect to the sun, the amount of rainfall they experience. I mean, there are a lot of considerations that go into the mechanical engineer's decisions. Here with the building, you know, things like the windows, the roofs of the building, a lot of the for example, where cracks exist within a building, the doors to the building, et cetera, even under revitalization, just like in replacement, those are all going to get replaced, even in the revitalization. So the envelope of the building will be a lot more robust, a lot more target hardened, per se, against some of those external environments. And so again, the architects and engineers looking at the building will take a look at the building, not only the way it sits today, but they'll take into account those other improvements to ensure that the mechanical systems, the plumbing systems, the electrical systems, et cetera, that they choose are a right fit for that building as it will exist for the next 40 years, as opposed to the way that that building existed for the last 45 years.
Okay, so if I heard you correct, then really it's the not fear of, but really kind of the thought is that the state would take a look at this and see that a revitalization is the right call for this community and this school, as opposed to a new construction school, is part of the reason for recommending something other than what the Planning Advisory Committee recommended. Is that what I want to make sure that and if I'm misspeaking, please correct me.
No, that certainly is one of the considerations. I mean, you know, the duration of the construction project, whether the students can be retained there or not, is certainly a factor that we take into account, because again, we have a very limited holding capacity. If we have to move the students out of Arnold, we really only have two choices. Principally, we can either move them to Annapolis Middle School. Annapolis Middle School, you know, right now houses Annapolis Elementary. It will soon house West Annapolis. But if you take a look at our capital improvement plan, we've got Tyler Heights, we have Hillsmere, we've got a number of schools right there in the Annapolis feeder pattern that really, you know, if things go according to a timeline, really absorb a lot of that capacity at Annapolis Middle School. On the other hand, Chesapeake Bay Middle School is fairly well removed out on the Mountain Road corridor heading out towards Gibson Island. So it's not really geographically proximal to the school. So whether the students can or can't remain, there is certainly part of the decision-making algorithm. Another part of the decision-making algorithm really has to do with our understanding of the fiscal climate here within the county. We're reminded, you know, concurrently, always, that we are in fact in a revenue constrained, a rather fiscally conservative jurisdiction. In fact, we're just reminded as late as Friday, 5 work days ago, that on our operating budget, we're not going to receive anything more than maintenance of effort. And the capital budget here in the county does have a capital debt affordability model that essentially constrains the amount of debt and projects that the county as a whole can afford. We are obviously part of that larger county-wide picture. Our $1.5 billion backlog, maintenance and infrastructure backlog, has really grown to $2 billion now, largely because of our inability for the county to keep up its rate of funding for schools. So the concern is not only that the state could in fact reject a project, not fund it at all, or fund it at the diminished level. There's an equal concern whether, when we approach the county government, whether the county government would be willing to fund not just the additional $6+ million, which is the differential. It's over $6 million, is the gap between revitalization and new construction. The county would be faced with the question of picking up that $6 million gap on the front end, and then if we get penalized by the state, and the state either reduces its contribution or doesn't fund it at all, the county would have to pick up that entire differential as well. And so there are certainly some cost implications that have to be recognized in a jurisdiction like Anne Arundel.
Okay, so outside of the money, let's talk about a couple of other things. How do we get over the before and after care relative to the gym being on the opposite end of the building? And I know this isn't instructional, this is kind of the other part of the hat. I mean, when we're building new schools, when we're revitalizing or renovating existing schools, we typically try to put gyms and before and after care near. If you look on the revitalization, we've got before and after care on one side of the crescent, and we've got the gym on the other side of the crescent, which doesn't really lead towards kids being able to use them securely without having enough people. How do we get over? Is the plan for them to walk across the street there to be able to use that? Is that what the long-term plan is?
Well, they wouldn't be walking across the street, but you're right. The before and after care space is geographically proximal to the cafeteria, which they're using today, the multipurpose room. They would be geographically removed from the gymnasium. That would be at the other end. So they would have to either make the election of using the cafeteria space, or they would have to make their way through the inside of the building if weather was inclement, or they could follow the sidewalk on the outside of the building if the weather was more favorable. But there's no question that if the before and after care to SAC program did want to make use of the gym, it's not immediately adjacent to it. So that is certainly one of the trade-offs in a revitalization option.
Okay, and then 2010 on page 3. I'll try to get through these fairly quickly. What did we do in 2010? If you don't mind reminding me, we did renovations in 88, 96, 2000, 2001, 3, 5, and 10.
We made some modifications and some replacement to the digital control system, the temperature.
For the boiler.
For
the boiler system.
Well, actually, it's the control system that's the thermostats that enables the individual units to come on, to come off. That building had a very antiquated control system, knowing that, we're on the verge of taking a look at what are we going to do with the building, replacing it, renovating it comprehensively, et cetera. The effort that was undertaken in 2010 was a modest step towards trying to address some of the temperature and climate control issues in the building, but it didn't go as far as we would, for example, in a younger building that was not poised to be comprehensively renovated and or replaced. So we didn't go through the process of replacing at that time the central plant, a lot of the distribution system, et cetera. It was sort of more of a stopgap measure to buy some time, knowing that this very large project was on the near-term planning horizon, not, 15, 20, 25 years away.
And remind me, the state looks back 10 years or 20?
15.
15.
The state has a 15-year look-back period on any capital investments that they've made into a school.
Okay, and then if you could turn over to page 5. These are the disadvantages. Under the disadvantages of revitalization, The first disadvantage says, under revitalization option C, it says partially addresses the current security issues with the parent drop-off. Do we plan on mitigating that in any kind of way, that disadvantage, by going with the revitalization?
If you take a look at the site plan, the disadvantage, if you read the rest of the sentence, essentially says that the administrative suite of that school does not have direct visual contact on the parent drop-off. So at Arnold, like they presently do, like at all of our schools, we have staff, our staff members of school are assigned duties, and that's typical. That's typical across all of our schools. And so because the office doesn't have direct visual contact with that parent drop-off area, it is disaggregated, but because it's at the side of the building, the staff there at the school, the administration and the staff at that school would have to have duties to monitor that. But even where we have direct visual contact, the office doesn't sit inside of the office and just look outside the window. At all of our schools, even our brand new schools that we've recently constructed, those staff members still have duties and assignments and are
They create a
outside of the
welcoming
building.
atmosphere for our students. You're right. It says under disadvantages, this option does not address all program area shortfalls due to the existing building conditions by going with revitalization.
That's a 10% trade-off that I said. Programmatically, they would have the right capacity, they would have the right count of spaces, they would have the right type of spaces, et cetera. But that sentence specifically is talking about that 10% up or down tolerance. So if a room size was, 6.5% off, we wouldn't correct that room size.
Okay, got you.
That's what that addresses.
And then the security compromise that is referenced in the disadvantages, are we ever going to be able to address that if we go with revitalization?
All schools essentially, what you want to do is you want to have the best line of sight. The school in its existing configuration and in either revitalization or modernization, has sort of a crescent shape to it. So you don't have as many of the long straight vantage points, long straight views. So unlike some schools where you can stand along a hallway and see, 350 feet down, because of the geometry of the building, you don't have that same sight line advantage, because as the building curves, you'll lose your perspective going down the hallway. Certainly, things like security cameras, access control systems, things like that are all going to be put into all of the options, but the sight line issue would not be, that extended sight line viewability issue would not be addressed under either revitalization or modernization. It would be addressed to a much greater extent in the replacement school. There are, again, blind spots in every school, but in the prototype school, there are many more straight lines and 90-degree angles as opposed to curves. So that sight line element is, in fact, improved.
Okay, and then one final item deals with mold. I've gone and visited the school many a times and been to the boiler room and various places. We've gone even to the crawl space to be able to see that it was pretty dry. But are we still, after we get through all of this, do you believe we're going to have those concerns within this school if we go with revitalization?
No, I don't, because again, as I said earlier, under revitalization, under all the options, but including revitalization, the exterior building envelope gets essentially target hardened, as I said earlier. So things like doors, windows, sealants, the control joints in the building are all reestablished. Anytime you've got cracks in masonry, they're pointed up. The roof membrane is made tight, and then on the inside of the building, so essentially you've target hardened the facility from the exterior coming in, and then by picking the right mechanical systems, electrical, plumbing systems, control systems, et cetera, you're able to control that interior environment. So essentially you're tackling that problem from two ends, both from the exterior coming in perspective and then maintaining that inside environment.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the entire team's work that's put forward. Thanks to the board for your indulgence on several of my questions. I will say as I close out, it's going to take me a little bit and I look forward to any other questions the board members have to help me as far as getting over my hump and fear of really voting for this. I think that this is one where the way that the building is shaped on that property, the site plan, it took me 6 years in order to build my home in Anne Arundel County, and that was a flat piece of property, not a tree on it. Okay, 6 years. I'm not necessarily in favor of leaving this school in its current condition relative to the hill that it's on at the very bottom on this piece of property. And so, you know, there's some reservations, some not like the one George Cromwell that we were on, but there's some serious reservations for leaving this school for the next 40 and 50 years in its current state. So that's my 2 cents, and I only get 1/8 of the vote.
Excuse me, can I call the group to order, please? Mr. Webb?
Thank you, Ms. Burge. Yeah, I've got some concerns about that grading too, and I note in a lot of the disadvantages you talk about grading conditions around the perimeter of the facility and the difficulty to add any additional classrooms in the future because of that grading. But what really catches my eye is the bullet point, potential for unforeseen conditions in renovated areas which could increase the cost of construction. Now, I don't know about you, but just about everybody I know who's had a construction job done, whatever the estimate was, they found some issue at some point in time that increased the cost. So taking into account the list of disadvantages here for the revitalization versus the unknowns, I'd be concerned about voting for going ahead with the revitalization at this point.
Well, as I said earlier, you're correct. Anytime you do renovation, whether it's revitalization, modernization, et cetera, we have the caveat that there's unforeseen conditions. When we do the feasibility study, we do not drill boreholes in the building. We don't do destructive demolition, so we don't tear away layers of the wall to see what's behind the layer of the wall. So you're right. I mean, there are some assumptions that are put into this in any project like this, and the cost estimators, the cost modelers, when you go to the both the initial cost modeling for it, essentially have a safety factor in their cost that take into account things for like unforeseen conditions, because you can't, to that degree of certainty, know them up front. So the way you do that is you hedge that exposure in your cost estimates, knowing that you're going to have more unforeseen conditions. So we think we've got that essentially captured, but in no feasibility study that anybody would ever undertake or afford realistically would we do destructive testing, destructive deconstruction of the building to discover what these unforeseen conditions are, et cetera. So the architects, the engineers, and the construction estimators, based on knowledge, know that there is in fact a cost to these unforeseen conditions. They know, based on a wealth of projects that they've completed in the past, approximately how much they might encounter, and they figure that into their cost estimates up front, knowing that they will encounter that. So hopefully you have it hedged, you've got it quantified in your upfront calculations, and you're not surprised by having nothing in reserve and yet knowing that you're going to have some unforeseen conditions. So this is pretty typical.
Thank you.
Ms. Ritchie.
When I first saw this, because it's not that it never happens, but it usually doesn't happen. Usually I remember the last time this happened, if I can remember correctly, the feasibility group wanted to do revitalization, and actually the recommendation was to do a replacement, so for another school at another time. So I've seen this occasionally happen, so when I first saw this, I was very concerned. But once you started discussing about the state, because we run the risk of saying, okay, we're going to go against the recommendation and we're going to go with what the community said and do a replacement, we run a real strong risk of not being able to recoup any of that money and having the county pay for the entire bill. Would that be fair to say?
The answer is yes, and if I could expand on that, if the county would be, in fact, there's a risk that the project then wouldn't go forward. here in Anne Arundel County, we've got a little bit of the tail wagging the dog syndrome. The state does participate in projects, and in a revenue-constrained environment under our capital debt affordability model, we take great accounting for the state's contribution, because the state's contribution in a revenue-constrained environment allows us to leverage our local dollars to do more work.
Right.
And so, as I said earlier, the county government would need to make the decision. If either the state didn't fund it or reduced their funding level, the local county government would need to pick up would at first have to pick up that $6+ million differential, and then they would have to make up for a portion or possibly all of the state contribution that would not be coming our way, which would put a greater burden on the county government to be able to pick up that increased cost.
And the problem being with the state is that the state, like you said in the very beginning, almost 2 hours ago, that the state has a very prescriptive list of ways that they do things, and they look at specific things and so forth, and then they come out and inspect. And while I know that there are some issues that are also in a lot of other schools because of the times that they were built and because of the way that they were built at the time, they know that those can be fixed doing other things first, not necessarily replacement. And so you've been doing this for a number of years, and we have regular conversations with the state. I mean, it's not like we're out here just doing stuff, willy-nilly. And we can most certainly decide to go ahead and build it ourselves without any state input, but then we have to convince the funding authority, which is not the Board of Education, but the county council, that we need you to completely fund the total cost of this project. And so, at first I struggled with this because I thought to myself, well, why are they going against that? Well, now I understand fully why. Because the likelihood of the state really giving us the money, if we really felt comfortable that the state would agree with us, we may have looked at that, and we would deal with some of these other issues. Yes, you have to go to Arnold, all the way down to Chesapeake Bay Middle School, or they may have to wait a couple years. But we could basically, if we say tonight, we're going to instead do a replacement, and we vote on that, actually, we could actually kill the whole entire project by doing that, because then we wouldn't have anything. They'd have to go back in the queue, because we've now taken them out, and we're not going to get the funds. Would that be fair to say?
That is a possibility that the project would either not go forward, or it may get delayed, because again, the county government has a fairly rigid capital debt affordability model that they can only afford so much CIP expenditures per year, and they've got that projected out. And so if the project fits in a given year, knowing that you have X dollars coming from the state and X dollars from the county, but then the calculus changes. Now you're not getting anything from the state, so you can't leverage state dollars. You have to have 100% of the county. What that's going to do is either within that one fiscal year, it would potentially bump out another project, or more likely, what it would do, it would take this project and it would delay it into future years, a year, down the line, in which the county would maybe have some greater ability to take on some additional debt or afford a project. So it either might not happen at all, it either would bump out something else, or the most likely scenario between not happen or get kicked down the road by a good number of years until they could afford it.
And you mentioned one thing about, when has the county ever fully funded any school? When have they ever only built a school with county funds?
To the best of my knowledge, not ever.
No, we did, was it 7 Oaks? One of them, we had one that we were forward funded completely.
Yeah, we had developer contributions to 7 Oaks, but we got state money back.
We did. We
got state money. I mean, it was approved, by the state. We forward funded a project. The state reimbursed us. They couldn't afford at that moment when we needed the school, because BRAC was coming and we had a big base expansion. We worked with the county. The county forward funded that project, and then the state reimbursed us for that after the project was already completed.
I'm going to jump in just real quick because I had some of the same concerns that Ms. Ritchie did, because, you know, I've visited Arnold, you know, many times, and starting over the years ago. And I've also gotten many emails from many parents who are very concerned about some specific things that come up over and over again, like, you know, allergies and dampness and flooding, and that the classrooms are dark and that there's water shooting out of toilets, things like that. And what my first question, I guess, is that true? Water shooting out of toilets? Okay. All right. Would there be new toilets with a revitalization?
The plumbing fixtures in the building get replaced, and we would actually be adding some additional plumbing fixtures into the building, so the total count would increase within the building.
Okay. And right now the classrooms are really dark. We're going to alleviate that problem with new windows, and you said that the classrooms that are very dark right now will have more natural light in them.
We'll be getting new windows, natural light will be introduced, the interior finishes of the building will be changed, so you'll have new floor tile, new ceiling tile, new wall paint, and then all of the lighting within the building, all of the electrical elements, lighting get replaced.
One of the other problems I hear about a lot is flooding. Now, is there something planned in a revitalization to alleviate that?
We would address the storm drainage of that property and reconfigure it as necessary to make sure that we were adequately controlling it. As I said earlier, you know, we've got some very aggressive storm water codes here in the county, some very aggressive environmental concerns, and we'd be working with those regulatory officials to make sure that any stormwater runoff was adequately managed.
And wasn't going straight to the school, it would be going away from the school, right?
Again, the engineers would work to towards that end.
And the dampness and the allergies, a new HVA system would be a million times better than anything that the school has ever seen before.
It always comes down to having the right fit. I mean, there's hundreds of systems out there, and so the issue is finding the right match. As I said, and I mean, Ms. Ritchie was, you know, making an example earlier of, you know, to what extent could you convince the state otherwise, and you can't convince a mechanical engineer, for example, and an external reviewer. So you can't convince a mechanical engineer from the state or somewhere else that for some reason we can't control the humidity in Arnold, and yet we do it in New Orleans, we do it in Tampa, and we do it in St. Thomas, everywhere else. So
I guess, you know, I'm a little concerned because somebody's been telling the community that the superintendent recommended a limited renovation that was basically a paint and patch. And that's not at all what a revitalization is. I mean, you don't paint and patch for $21 million. I mean, we do a lot for $21 million. It feels like a new school when you're done. I mean, when you go in, it feels like a new school. Honestly, I would be willing to take a risk with the state if I thought that all of the complaints that I've been getting weren't going to be addressed with the revitalization. I'd say, you know, take the risk and vote for the replacement. But I think that from what I've heard, and I spoke with Mr. Shaknovich because I was concerned about the change from what the recommendation was. And I asked what the reasons were, and I asked him to explain it to me. And I thought the reasons made a lot of sense. And if I didn't think that those answers were good, and I didn't think we had hired really smart people who actually know what they're doing, and this is their business, more so than us, if I thought that these things weren't going to be solved by a $21 million revitalization, then I would say take the risk with the state. But I think that the architects and engineers who agreed that all of those problems that the parents have been complaining about will be solved through a revitalization, I don't see what the problem is other than it's not a brand new building. Mr. Pruski?
Thank you, Madam President. I have two questions, Mr. Shaknovich. In the environmental impact, which one of these projects, and of course I could read the summary, has the least amount of environmental impact? That's number one. And number two, we all know that there are folks promoting pre-K kindergarten, which I'm a big fan of, but we're going to be having additions added. And so instead of thinking of 40 years, let's think about 50 and 60, because we're going to be adding pre-K in other classrooms as our next step in the state of Maryland. Which one of these projects is the best for adding additional classrooms and spaces? Because that probably will be the next thing that we'll be addressing in our school system. I already discussed with some folks earlier about Cromwell and Jessup, but in terms of this project, I'm curious in your response. Thank you.
Okay, to address environmental impacts, the revitalization has the least amount of environmental impacts. The replacement, by far, by many multiples, has the greatest amount of environmental impacts. If you're speaking about ecology, green space, tree preservation, etc., in every single aspect, revitalization has the least impact, and modernization will be the next most impactful, and replacement has by far the greatest level of environmental impact. Specific to your other question, if you remember at the beginning, the building as it currently sits today has a state-rated capacity of 456, and we're going to be expanding it up to 565. So that's a pretty robust expansion. It's almost 25%. It's in excess of 20% if you do the math. And so that will take into account opportunities to add programmatic expansion, as you said, should we need ECI classrooms there or pre-K, as well as turnover within a community and growth and development. There is some construction going on there very close to Arnold Elementary School that we're already aware of, and those are in fact in the numbers that the Maryland Department of Planning and in the Anne Arundel County Planning and Zoning Office provide us to help inform our demography. But with constructing a building that has just under 25% spare capacity, we essentially have the room to absorb, those future activities.
Mr. Bruschi, also, all of our ed specs on all of our projects, we do add a pre-K, whether the school has one or not. So the pre-K is actually already built into this program.
I understand the problem is which program will get passed in the next year or two, because it could go from
Right.
ECI programs of 1 or 2 classes to 4 or 5, almost like when we went to full day kindergarten. Remember, we had half day kindergarten for all those years and so on. And I understand that. I'm just thinking about future out of adding 4 or 5 more classrooms, because that could be the reality if there's universal pre-K, if that moves to that point. Thank you.
All right, I don't see any more comments from the board, so I'd like to take public testimony. First, Councilman Ladd, followed by Carrie Petz and Lisa Bodie.
Can I practice being a gentleman and let the ladies go
You
first?
certainly may.
Thank you.
I was trying to be respectful, Mr. Ladd, and let you go first.
I put a tie on, so I'm going to try to be a gentleman tonight.
Good evening, President Burge and members of the board. My name is Lisa Fletcher Bodie, and I'm the former PTA president, current CAC chair at Arnold Elementary. I had the pleasure of serving on our feasibility study committee and want to take a moment to thank the other members, especially those from AACPS and Grimm and Parker, for their time, insight, experience, creativity, and knowledge. It is because I know the amount of evaluation, prior experience, and thoughtful discourse that went into the committee's recommendation for replacement that I was disappointed to read interim superintendent's contrary recommendation for limited revitalization. We certainly appreciate the extensive improvements that revitalization will provide, but it fails to address 3 primary issues facing Arnold: the site's water flow impact on the building, the school's ability to meet future population needs, and most importantly, school and campus security. Many of you have visited Arnold, thank you, and are familiar with our unique site topography, building location, and design. I think it's safe to say the architect and design team from 1965 were fascinated with hydroelectric power because they basically copied the Hoover Dam and put classrooms in it. Our current two-story, half-underground, semicircle-shaped school building sits near the bottom of over 100 feet of grade with water flow channeling directly toward the building. As you know from the many repair work orders, moisture and mold health complaints, and prior testimony, we are constantly using time and county resources to combat the impact of water on our aging foundation and systems. While I know engineers will reassure us that there are new technologies in the construction field which can help mitigate some of our significant water issues, I'd simply ask, why throw good taxpayer money into a partial solution when we have the option of building a new school on the high point of the property, as recommended by the feasibility committee? Project estimates, of course, show budget savings with the limited revitalization, but as the feasibility study states, we won't know what happens when we actually move some dirt, open the walls and crawl space, and get into the reality of revitalizing a 50-plus-year-old water-infiltrated foundation. I think we all know that overages are not only possible, but have proven probable. Similarly, the limitation of our building's placement on the lot does not allow for future expansion or use of portables to accommodate a growing population or the necessary relocation of our current students during the phased construction of a limited revitalization. We currently have one portable and have been told by you guys and others in the county can't have any more. We would be forced to rotate classrooms into the media center, multipurpose room, or off-site for 27 months. Yes, limited revitalization accounts for current state formulated projections, showing our enrollment to increase to about 400 over the next several years. But history has proven these projections to be underestimated, putting schools over capacity. Against the theories of modern medicine and optimal maternal age, I am already adding one more student to your projections. Even with limited revitalization, we will not be fully compliant with current ed specs. So what happens when state-mandated pre-K and the planned new townhome and single-family developments come online? The recommended new construction accommodates not only the growing population, likely pre-K requirements, and meets all ed specs, but also allows additional site space when expansion or portables are needed in the future. And our current students can stay in place during construction per the feasibility study. Carrie Petz will address the overwhelming security concerns we have. So for my summary, I urge you to support the feasibility committee's well-reasoned recommendation for new construction of Arnold Elementary. Limited revitalization offers the most disruption to students, penny-wise but pound-foolish solution. As a parent and taxpayer, that just doesn't make sense to me. Rebuild Arnold Elementary is both the most responsible, practical, and budgetary decision, and our children have earned it.
You should have just written Fletch on there, and then
Yeah,
I would have
exactly.
known who you
How
were
are you?
right away.
Madam President and members of the board, I am Carrie Petz, the past CAC chair, current PTA president, and neighbor to Arnold Elementary. The safety and security issues that Arnold has are a direct result of its placement on the property and its circular design. On page 49 of the feasibility study, we shared the deficiencies of the current property as, quote, site circulation and safety and life safety and accessibility concerns. Revitalization option leaves us with, quote, not an ideal long-term solution to the vehicular traffic issues that we have. Mixing cars, buses, and kids, the student drop-off is a dicey experience on any given day. No emergency vehicle access to the upper fields or rear play area, a play area that will require us to mix grades 1 through 5 at the same time. No visibility to the upper fields that will be feet from 2 new developments that have direct access to Route 2. With 100 to 200 children playing up there, I do not trust, although I love, 2 to 3 teachers, lunch aides, with the safety of our children on that remote area. You have all been shared a document with photographs. I don't know if she shared it. I gave it. Document with photographs of the sight lines of the exterior of our building. None of these will change with the revitalization. It is unacceptable to have no visibility from one end of our exterior to the other, especially in the rear play areas. No sightline to the parking areas or even across our bus loop. The interior has limited sightlines as well. Housing administration at one end of the building is not ideal for overall safety. Boys in the lower level primary grades are afraid to use the bathroom because it's so far and out of sight from their classroom. In today's times of security, these are all unacceptable voids in the revitalization plan. Per Appendix E in the document, building security and site safety are the CPTED uses natural surveillance, territorial reinforcement, natural access control, and target hardening. 3 of 4 of these issues are not viable under revitalization. Another item of safety and security will come into play during the move and relocating of students during a 20-month phasing of revitalization. The report states on page 56-57 that there will be, quote, limited construction access and staging area while students are in the building. What happens when it's realized that students have to move? Where are they going to go? At the time of this report, there is no swing space available. What is the cost of this unforeseen and extensive disruption to academics for 27 months? The replacement option is the solution to all of the items Lisa and I have mentioned. The 7 disadvantages of a replacement building listed in the report include, quote, loss of playfield during construction, does not repurpose existing school, and not all classrooms have ideal north-south solar orientation. It is very clear that the experienced members of the architectural and engineering firm have made the best recommendation for our children and community, a replacement building. Please do not be short-sighted and save a few $1 million now that will, as history dictates, cost us more in the end. We are asking you to vote for a replacement school for Arnold and let us work with the state and council for funding. Thank you.
For the record, I'm Dick Ladd. I live down the street from Arnold. I am the councilman from that area and have become familiar with the school because I fielded many of the same concerns and from constituents about the condition in the school. But before I do that, can we ask, it's okay for you people to sit down? If you'd
You've
like.
been sitting
Thank
for
you.
hours.
I know.
Thank you.
So look, I understand. I've been through all of this thing. I can tell you that I've talked to some of you. I've read as much of the stuff I could. I've discussed this with Alex. I've discussed it with as many of your people that I can get on the phone. I also have had the pleasure and the opportunity of looking at a lot of stormwater things on my peninsula. On that particular hill that we're working on, we're putting a big housing development on one side of it, on the other corner, and across the street. One thing I can tell you is that as we start wrestling with the stormwater runoff that we see throughout the county under the new regulations to keep all the water on the site, it's a tough nut. And what you hear is you don't, when I've looked at the plans, okay, I go in, I get in the weeds, and I'm going to run overtime. But look, you get into the weeds and you start looking at the engineer drawings. And the first thing when you start seeing these things, and you don't see it till you get the sketch plan review, not the feasibility, but the sketch plan, you're back worrying about topography, hydrology, where the clay levels are, where the water's going to go down and run. The one thing that we know about this site is we have a cup sitting downhill, the water runs into it, and it gets caught. Now we've got to get and I know that they went back and they resealed the building and we temporarily are keeping the moisture from getting inside. But when I first started going down there, I'm up in the crawl space, a lot of you guys, and it was wet in there. The stuff was coming through the bricks and maybe we have fixed it. But the problem is now we've got this hydraulic pressure behind it, and that can be addressed. I'm not an engineer, and Alex and his people come back and say he doesn't know what he's talking about. But I'm telling you, when you start watching how I move the water around it, what's down there in the clay, if I'm looking at blueprints, I want to know where the hydrology is on this thing, where the clay levels are, and how the water's going to move levelly on levels when we start trying to catch the stuff on the ground. When we catch it on the ground, the best engineering design practices, catch it and let it filter down. It's fine, it filters down till it hits clay, and then it goes bang like that. Where does it go first? Up against the wall of the school, possibly, unless the clay levels are under the school. Go out and back sometimes and you look at how wet the playground, the play area is in back of the school. It's very wet. That's happened one of the times like that. So the water's going through. This site is part of the problem. It's downhill. It's almost as sloped as the one up at Jessup. Can you hear me up there? And you're taking the school at Jessup, I would note, from the top of the hill and moving it down the half the hill, and you're putting another impervious surface behind it. Make sure you get the drains around that thing good, because now you got the downhill stuff. I deal with this all the time in my district, with all the hills and up, the water's going to the river. It's terrible. And you find out that when you look at what the engineers do, if they can get the water over the property line, they're done. But I sit there on the other side and I watch all this stuff coming down and say, who in the hell signed off on that thing? And I'm telling you, that's been my experience. So I am very, very nervous about the siting decision. The decision that the committee advised you on or is supported puts it at the top. And that, in terms of the integrity of the building, we've taken away, I think, the root cause of a lot of the problems we have. I agree with Alex that we can put air conditioning in it, we can dry out the air, and we can do that. But I don't know how we deal with the water that runs down the hill. I think that's the problem. That's why I come here, because I don't see it in the plans. It says, well, it's in the detail. I absolutely agree that it's in the detail when you get to the sketch plan. My argument to you this evening is, we all want a solution. Give us 2 weeks. I'll bet you your staff back here has got somebody on staff back there that can go out and tell us what the hydrology is, where the layers are down there. Even if we have to drill some borings to get down there and find how far down the stuff is. Maybe there's a solution that I feel comfortable in telling these good people, I know we can get the water around that building. Well, I don't have to worry about any more water coming through the building, and I agree that Alex can dry it out. But I'd like to see those samples done. That way I feel a little bit more comfortable with you saying, okay, I'll leave the building where it is. But I have serious reservations on that, and the only thing I can tell you is I've spent the last couple of years when we're doing stormwater in that area with people on a peninsula where where the people out there are vitally concerned about how the water runs off their property. And I would just urge you to think about that, because if we get the hydrology on this thing wrong, we got a problem. And I'll cite you a place where you can see. If you go over the Seven River Bridge heading east, and you look on the right-hand side, you see that big, beautiful White House in there with that big, the big field up there. What's happened? The water runs down. The water comes out mid-hill where it hits the clay level and it starts eroding. You can see the same problem when you look at several places on the river. You can see it over at Gibson Island. I may be wrong, but I think the risk is real. So one day I wrote down here, and I said that, we may have the thing where, what did I put? I thought it was a pretty good line. But anyway, basically we may have the lowest cost, we may be getting the lowest cost thing, but we got a hell of a lot more risk. And I understand when you write estimates, say there's unknown unknowns out there. I used to write that kind of stuff, and that's absolutely true. But I think where we are at this juncture, if you prove the proposition tonight that we go to the revitalization, getting that backed off is hard. If you find out that doing that revitalization is off base because of how the drainage is down underneath and something like that, I think a 2-week exercise to confirm that is about right. Now, I showed these ladies what I was going to say. They want to build it up high. I do too. But if that, for your own reasons, and you're afraid of what the state is going to say, I understand that. But there was a state guy on that commission with him, and he agreed with us, right?
No, it was a she.
She was
there
beg
for
your pardon.
one meeting, and she
Okay,
did
I
not
beg your
contribute to the opinion.
She what?
She did not contribute to our
Okay.
finding.
Final opinion.
Okay. So anyway, I think we have some time to look at this thing. And the other thing I would comment, we talk about the funding on this thing. I can tell you that when you look at the capital program, we're not going to get a chance to do much more than design this school this year, just because of how much money there's there. Some one of the schools, these elementary schools in 16 are going to get slipped out. And Arnold is the last in that next tranche to go. I understand that. If there's anything I learned about Severna Park high school arguments, MGT priority. I got it, guys. I heard that movie. So the same thing ought to hold on elementary schools. So I can accept the fact that Arnold probably will be the one that gets slipped. And so we don't have to press this argument right now. But I do think it's important that we go through the design, because when you go through the design, you're going to find out, because of the stormwater runoff, where you're going to have to put these stormwater catchment devices. I'm working on a project literally over, in Severna Park, and I'm counting where I've had to build 10 little catchment ponds and then figure out how I take the outflow down into some place where they've got the capacity to do it. It's a serious engineering problem, and I don't think Alex doesn't disagree with that. We haven't crossed that bridge yet. And you might find that what we're getting to really isn't terribly feasible, or it's going to be much more expensive than we think. I agree, he's got an extra 5% in the bid. I'd say 2 weeks, let's find out what we know about the ground. I don't know, and I would ask Alex to come back so we can have a debate, or maybe he can tell me to go home, which I would say was a pretty good idea. But I think, I don't know where you are administratively. I know you've got a motion on the table, which is made and seconded. But I think a 2-week deferment on that, if there is some opportunity to look at some other alternatives. One of these ladies told me today that where's some property, up the street, that we even might have an alternative site where you don't have to worry about a lot of these things. But I don't know how that works. But I do think it's worth I would argue to you tonight that it's worth the time to look and make sure we understand what the hydraulics are, unless Alex knows all that stuff already. But it's not visible. It hasn't been visible to me, and they maybe don't want to tell me for various good reasons. But I think that's where we are. Anyway, guys want to counter? I went over too much, but.
They
And I
had their
apologize.
time.
Oh, wait a minute, I gotta tell you what my last thing says. I will buy you a cup of coffee if I have not been polite to you tonight.
Who told you to say that?
That's me. I have my coach up there.
Okay.
Look, it's not that I don't care. I seriously care a lot about this, but I tell you, when you go out and walk the hills and you look at the stormwater and what it does and what the erosion does, I am vitally concerned that we're on the cusp of making a decision that 30 or 40 years from now, we're going to say, boy, we didn't get this one right this time. So just because we did it a couple of years ago doesn't mean we have to repeat it. We should take the time to make sure we know where we are.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you. Miss Ritchie, did you have?
Yeah, oh, sorry. Yeah, Mr. Sheknovich, could you come up and kind of address somebody who didn't spoke about? Thank you.
As part of the feasibility study, we do undertake a soil analysis. In your exhibit, if you take a look at page 22 of 138 under site soils, there are 4 soil types on that property. We get this information, of course, from the Department of Natural Resources. All 4 categories are categorized as well drained. There are no hydraulic soils on the property, so there's no soils that are prone to becoming liquefied and slipping down the hill, so you don't have like a mudslide kind of potentials. There's no hydraulic soil. So we do a soil analysis. As I said earlier, it's on page 22 of the written document. With respect to the contingency, to address both Mr. Webb's earlier comment as well as Mr. Ladd's comment, we have a fairly robust contingency. It's not 5%, it's 10% of the total project costs is set aside in contingency to take care of those things that are unknown. That 10% is in that initial cost. So when we say the revitalization option will be $20.38 million, embedded within that is just under $1.8 million worth of money already factored in case we discover things that are unforeseen conditions, like a pipe behind a wall or some sort of waterproofing endeavor, et cetera. So we know going in on any revitalization or modernization project that there are site unforeseen conditions. That's a given. That's why we have large reserves built into the project, but they're built into the upfront costs. We hope not to have to use them, right? But it will be disingenuous to not have those safety factors, those reserves built into the cost of the project. So if you go to the detail sheets for revitalization, which is on page 108 of your exhibit, you'll see down at the bottom that we do have, in fact, phase and cost contingency. Contingency is that reserve that I talked about earlier, already built into the model, just like it's built into all of the other options, because again, we want to try to telegraph to our appropriating bodies essentially what their maximum exposure is, what their maximum fiscal exposure is. And so we want a budget for those unforeseen conditions because we know they're going to happen. We want the county government and the state government to also know that we are budgeting for those unforeseen conditions, and we want them to approve the project with those contingency reserves in the project budget in case we wind up needing them. As you know, those budgets are line item appropriated. We are not in any way, shape, or form able to move a single penny from that project to any other project. They're line item appropriated by both the state and the county. At the end of the project, if we wind up not having those unforeseeable conditions, we don't wind up encountering some of those other elements that could cause cost overruns on a project. If we use less than that 10%, that money reverts back to the state and reverts back to the county, and those two governmental entities are at their total liberty to reallocate, reapportion, redistribute that money in any way they deem fit.
So the soil stuff has already been done. We've already looked at what the soil is there. And a lot of this has to do with maybe drainage, the way it's being drained or run off now, I mean, which will be addressed. Because we don't want, I mean, it makes no sense for us to revitalize something and then it'll still allow the water just to keep flowing down. So we're looking at the drainage and the ways we're going to do the drainage already. I mean, that's in our head. We already know it may not be necessarily pulled out on here, but I mean, you all have been dealing with this school for a bit of time.
We have, again, this, not to be too cavalier about it, this isn't the only building in this country that's built on a hill. Water flows downhill. We've got how many thousands of buildings around the country built on hillsides. So,
And
it's just like with the HVAC, as I said with the HVAC thing, I mean, the industry, the design professions, the construction professions, things like soil suitability, drainage capacity, absorption capacity of soil, that is such a much better understood element now than it was, 50 plus years ago when this building was originally built. So the intention would be to take new engineering systems, to take new engineering controls, and take that knowledge that we have today that we didn't have before, and apply it against the problem, whatever the problem happens to be.
And the last one, we've increased by 100 seats, about 100 seats, right? And that's what, I mean, 109? 109 seats, so.
We're 109 seats above the highest projected enrollment that they're over the existing school, and that is actually almost 150 seats over where they currently are. So the current school, their present enrollment is 424.
Right.
The building is currently rated for 456, so it has a
Okay.
higher state capacity than the current enrollment, but we're increasing it more yet. So it's 109 over the state rated capacity. It's almost 150 over how many children are in the building today.
Okay, so that would address some of those issues with pre-K, because we're not going to have 150 pre-K students.
Well, again, as Mr. Alberts mentioned to Mr. Peruski, I mean, we do have pre-K, ECI, and full-day kindergarten built in. We don't have 150 pre-K seats. We have 150 seats for some youngsters, and if they happen to be pre-Ks, then that's what they are.
Mr. Webb?
Mr. Shachnovich, the MGT study, what did that recommend for Arnold Elementary?
It was a priority 2 project. It was not a category 1 project.
We're on schedule according to the MGT study?
No, sir. Our whole entire capital improvement program plan is woefully behind. The whole $1.5 billion program was supposed to be eradicated in a 10-year time span. We've eradicated less than a third of the initial project, and during that time, because of the slippage, our inability to as aggressively prosecute projects as one would hope, that initial $1.5 billion deficit has actually grown to approximately $2 billion now. And it will continue to grow, and our backlog will grow, and the timeline will continue to get stretched out unless the funding model changes. Given the current funding assumptions, if the current funding model stays, we are woefully behind, and will get ever more so behind our renovation replacement cycle.
Okay. Now, in that study, did MGT recommend replacement for that school when it came up?
No, sir, it did not.
Yes.
It did?
Yes.
Oh, it did, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Korbelak?
If the board were to vote to completely replace the school and it went to the state and the state said, we're not going to do that, does that mean that we come back here a year from now, go through this again, and then propose revitalization instead? Is it going to put it back a year if the state turns us down?
It certainly could. It certainly has that potential. The converse is, even if you recommend revitalization, when it got to the state or the county government could decide that they're going to, if you ask for X amount of dollars revitalization, the county government could say, well, here's what you asked for, and I'll give you $8 million more, board. Please reconsider and replace the school now that I'm giving you $8 million more than you originally asked for. So the county government could do that as well.
Okay, but there would be a chance, assuming the county government wouldn't give us a spare $8 million, that we would have to go back a year from now. We couldn't just flip it this year and say, oh, okay, if you're not going to let us replace it, could you let us revitalize it? Do we have to wait a year to go back to the state?
It would come back to the board once again for a new vote, and then it will get reissued back to the state, and that analysis process would begin again.
So it would be a year if we have to revote.
I'm not sure if it would be an entire year. It would be schedule slippage for sure.
Okay, I just want to know if there's going to be schedule slippage, if the community is going to be willing to take that risk.
It actually wasn't a vote question. I have a question with that. How many dollars would be wasted on the planning if we had to redo that? I mean, because do they just look at this document, or do we do something else prior to that?
We send the feasibility study up to the state.
Okay.
They then take the contents of the feasibility study, and then more often than not, if they deem fit, they will send their subject matter experts down to review the
Okay.
building themselves. They'll make that decision based on the on this feasibility study and that site visit. We would not go into the design phase of the project because the design effort for replacement is drastically different than a renovation activity. So we wouldn't go into the design phase
Okay.
unless we knew that there was an agreement and accord between the board's recommendation, the state's recommendation, and the county government's perspective.
Okay.
If those three entities are in the same place, then we would go forward into the design. I wouldn't want to waste design money unnecessarily.
Okay, thank you. All right, I don't see any more comments. We do have a motion on the floor to support superintendent's recommendation of option C, revitalization. All those in favor of the superintendent's recommendation, please raise your hand. All those opposed?